Business Skills 360, the podcast that looks at the other side of business English. Hello, I'm Tim Simmons, and you're listening to Business Skills 360. We're going to kick off the new year with an insanely great show on presentations. But first, I want to wish all of you an awesome 2011. Hopefully, the coming year is unbelievably wonderful for you. I know it will be for me. Now, let's get to all that awesomeness. Okay, forget everything I just said. I'm not Steve Jobs, and I don't have a shiny new gizmo to show you. If I keep using words like awesome, you're going to get sick of me really fast. You might have heard that Steve Jobs gives great presentations. Well, he can wow a crowd of people who already love Apple. But should we really try to copy him? His style and his adjectives don't really work when English is not your first language. And they fall flat when you are an HR manager presenting a new compensation plan or an engineer reporting change orders on a big project. So, exactly how can you make an impact? How can you tighten up your presentation so that it connects to your audience? I'm sure all of you have heard of the mnemonic device KISS, short for Keep It Short and Simple. This is excellent advice for all types of business communication, and I completely agree with it. But KISS misses a couple of key points that you also need to consider, so I've added these and now like to use KISSER, which stands for Keep It Short, Simple, Engaging, and Real. Let's look at the first term, short. Many bad presentations have too much repetition or unnecessary information. People want what is important and relevant, and that's what you should give them. Try this. After you prepare your presentation, go through and cut out 30%. You should be able to do that without damaging your central message. What remains will have much more impact because it's not surrounded by fluff. This applies to PowerPoint slides, charts, and diagrams as well. As a general rule, try to limit slides to 1 per minute. And if your boss gives you 10 minutes to speak, make sure you can do it in just 5. Next is simple. Simple means organized and clear. Start with the purpose of your presentation, which you should be able to summarize in 1 sentence. Something like, make people understand that expenses are too high. From that purpose, organize your ideas into 3 or 4 points. If you want, you can frame these points as questions, like this. What expenses can we reduce? What expenses can we eliminate? And what are the long-term savings? And tell your audience what the outline is at the start. If your questions are good ones, they'll want to figure out the answers. Simple also applies to your language and visuals. Don't try to impress people with technical lingo. It won't work. And keep PowerPoint slides simple. No confusing charts or graphs. Only the essential information in simple form. The text on your slides should not be too hard to see, no smaller than a 30-point font. This will force you to keep the text simple. I promise you, people will appreciate that. Okay, now we come to engaging. You need to catch and hold people's attention. You want them to be interested. And how do we do that? In terms of what you say, there are a lot of great techniques that we'll cover in our upcoming podcast series on impact presentations. They include repetition, rhetorical questions, metaphors, and visualizing facts and figures. One thing that is not engaging is information overload. Don't overwhelm your audience. Use pictures and other visual aids to illustrate your points. If you're doing a PowerPoint, Don't put two informational slides right after each other. Mix it up. Give some information, then use a picture to help people understand what you're saying. Then give more information. Being engaging also means being interactive. Ask questions. Look at people. Ask for input. Get people to do something besides just listen to you talk. Lastly, you need to keep it real. If you start talking about things that nobody can understand, nobody can relate to, or nobody cares about, then you will lose your audience. Guaranteed. Try using an anecdote or story, a story that everyone can connect with, something that everyone experiences. Tell them why your topic matters. Tell them how it affects them, their jobs, and their lives. Connect yourself with the people and connect the people with the topic. Another part of keeping it real is working within your abilities. If you're not comfortable telling a joke in English, don't tell a joke. If you have to keep the words simple, keep them simple. Presentations are hard enough as it is. Don't try to push yourself too far outside your normal communication style. Right. Keep it short, simple, engaging, and real. If those words can describe your presentation, you'll do great. You don't need to use the word awesome. You can be awesome without it. That's all for today. If you'd like to test yourself on what we've just covered, have a look at the mybeonline.com website. There you'll find a quiz about today's show, as well as a complete transcript. Next week, we'll look at the actual delivery of the presentation. We'll talk about what you should be doing when you're in front of all those people. So long, and see you again soon.
You're listening to Business English Pod, the business English podcast for professionals on the move. Welcome back to Business English Pod. In today's episode, we'll be looking at closing down and summarizing your presentation. As we mentioned a while back, a strong introduction is very important to giving your audience a reason for listening. Similarly, a strong conclusion is very important to leave your audience with a great impression and give them a clear message about what action to take. So, what structure should you use to close down a presentation? Well, I'm sure some of you have your own methods, but this simple format has always worked for me and covers all the main points. First, give your audience a clear signal that you're going to finish. Second, briefly summarize the main points of your presentation. Third, state your recommendation or give your call to action. Let your audience know what you want them to do. And finally, finish off by thanking your listeners and inviting questions or discussion. In today's listening, we'll be exploring this format. The presentation takes place at Harper Toland, a major global producer of special-purpose steel. Last year, Harper Toland launched a new product line, Color Max, which is a kind of brightly colored steel used in building and manufacturing. Unfortunately, the sales results in Europe for the first year have been quite disappointing. Nicholas Fisher, the new regional sales director for Harper Toland, has been hired to fix the problem. He is just finishing off a presentation in which he has been discussing his proposal. As you listen, pay attention to the language and structure Nick uses to give his presentation a strong finish.
Product and industry knowledge are important, but the crux of the matter is that we simply aren't aggressive enough in our approach to selling. To sell, you simply have to push, and push hard. So, as we can see, a first-class CRM strategy and a great marketing plan aren't worth the paper they're written on if we don't have qualified staff to push them through. Okay, that's all I have to say on this topic for the moment. Now, I'd like to recap the main points of my presentation before I open it up for questions. To sum up, first, I analyzed the sales results for 2006. I talked about how our drive to increase brand recognition through a surge in advertising has failed because of mediocre initiative and inconsistent follow-up from our salespeople. Second, I explained how our special task force found major deficiencies in our sales training system and in our staff's basic sales skills. Finally, I proposed a recovery plan for 2007. I stressed that the most important thing at this stage is not advertising or technology, but the way that we train our salespeople. Let me leave you with one thought. What I'd like to stress is, and I can't emphasize this enough, that it is absolutely essential to have an effective sales team, and effective salespeople must have effective training. So, what I'm asking from you today is a commitment to increase the training budget by 25% so that we can address this training shortfall. Then, by this time next year, instead of scratching our heads, we'll be cracking the champagne. Many thanks for your attention. And now, I'm very interested in hearing your comments.
When the dialogue begins, Nick is summarizing the main points in the last section of his presentation. As we said in BEP 102, it's vital that you have an easily recognizable structure throughout your presentation. Maintaining a clear structure helps keep your audience focused and interested. So, at the end of each section, you should usually summarize your main point and signal that you're moving on to a new section. How does Nick summarize his last main point?
So, as we can see, a first-class CRM strategy and a great marketing plan are not worth the paper they're written on if we don't have qualified staff to push them through.
So, as we can see, is our signal that a summary is about to begin. The single word "so" is often used to introduce a summary or to change the topic. What is Nick's main point in this section? Unless we have qualified staff to push them through, that is, to make them work, a CRM or customer relationship management system and a marketing plan have no value. That is, they are not worth the paper they're written on. Then, Nick signals that the last part of his presentation is over.
Okay, that's all I have to say on this topic for the moment.
He could also say,
Right. That ends the last section of my talk.
That's all I want to say for now on the third part of my presentation.
Having clearly indicated that the last section of his talk is over, Nick signals a summary of his main points.
Now, I'd like to recap the main points of my presentation before I open it up for questions.
Recap is short for recapitulate, which means to summarize briefly. There's a lot more language that Nick could have used to introduce his summary. For example,
To conclude,
In conclusion,
now, to sum up,
so let me summarize what I've said.
finally, may I remind you of some of the main points we've considered.
During my talk today, I've described the results of our investigation.
during his summary, Nick uses sequencing words, first, second, finally. These are used to give a clear and concise summary of his main points. Also, notice the use of strong collocations. Collocation means word partnerships, words that naturally go together. Nick's collocations include analyze the sales results, find major deficiencies, and propose a recovery plan. Using such word partnerships makes your English dynamic and fluent. So when you're learning vocabulary, be sure to study words in groups or whole phrases. So, Nick has finished his summary, but his presentation is not finished yet. Actually, one of the most important parts of his presentation is yet to come. As you know, the last thing you say is probably what your audience will remember best. This is called the take-home message, the idea that the audience will take home with them. It's important to be decisive and clear. Also, try not to be too complex. The conclusion should consist of a simple major statement with no more than 2 or 3 connotations, if these are absolutely essential. A connotation is an association. This is also where you should give recommendations or make a call to action. Your audience wants to know what to do next. Don't forget to tell them. How does Nick finish up his talk? Let's listen again.
Let me leave you with one thought. What I'd like to stress is, and I can't emphasize this enough, that it is absolutely essential to have an effective sales team. And effective salespeople must have effective training. Now, what I'm asking from you today is a commitment to increase the training budget by 25%.
Nick shows that he's making his final comments by saying, "Let me leave you with one thought." Then, throughout his next few sentences, he uses a number of rhetorical techniques to add emphasis to his main point. Rhetorical techniques are ways to persuade your audience. He says, "What I'd like to stress is," and "I can't emphasize this enough." Notice how he lowers his voice and slows down. Longer pauses and a stronger voice add additional emphasis to his final message, which is a clear call to action. He says, "Now, what I'm asking from you today is a commitment." This is a particularly strong call to action. There are many other ways, however, to make a concluding recommendation. Let's listen to some more examples of phrases we can use.
In conclusion, my recommendations are:
I therefore propose the following strategy.
I'd like to finish with some observations based on what I've said.
There are 2 conclusions to be made from this, namely,
I think we have
seen that we should.
What we need to do is.
So, let me get straight to the point. We need action, and we need it now.
Returning to our listening, it's worth noting that Nick ends with a positive visual image for the future that they'll have by following his plan.
Then, by this time next year, instead of scratching our heads, we'll be cracking the champagne.
So, instead of scratching our heads in confusion, we will be cracking, that means opening, the champagne to celebrate. Finally, how do you end the presentation? You should close your talk by thanking your audience and by opening the question and answer session. This is also known as Q&A.
Many thanks for your attention. So now, I'm very interested in hearing your comments.
You can hear the smile in Nick's voice, can't you? Don't forget to leave your audience with a great impression by finishing off with a smile. There is, of course, plenty of other language Nick could have used to finish off his presentation. Let's listen to a few more examples.
Thank you for your attention. And now, if you have any questions, I'd be glad to answer them.
Thank you for listening. Now, I'd be glad to try and answer any questions.
I thank you all for being such an attentive audience. And now I'm sure you must have some questions. So I'll be happy to try and answer them. Yes, Simon.
So, let's throw it open to questions.
Any questions?
Now it's your turn to practice making a concluding recommendation and opening it up for questions. Imagine that you've just given a presentation on improving sales. Think of 2 recommendations you have using your own company as an example. Do you want to retrain the sales department? Or perhaps increase the advertising budget by 25%? Do you want to expand your market? Or perhaps target a different market, such as older people or younger people, bigger or smaller companies? After you hear the beep, practice giving your concluding recommendation. Remember to make a clear call to action. Use the language we practiced earlier, such as, "We need action and we need it now." Or, "In conclusion, my recommendations are," or, "What we need to do is." Then, remember to thank everyone for their attention and open it up to questions using the phrases we just learned. Are you ready? First, take a few seconds to think, then begin talking after the beep. How did you do? Let's listen to an example answer.
So let me get straight to the point. We need action and we need it now. What we need to do is this. First, increase the advertising budget by 25%. Second, target a new market, mid and small size companies. Thank you for listening. Now, I'd be glad to try and answer any questions.
Remember, going back and trying it again is a great way to practice. Substitute different language. Use your pause button if necessary. Practice several times using different examples until you feel comfortable with a wide variety of phrases. Well, that's about all for today's Business English Pod episode on closing down and summarizing. Today, you've learned language for finishing off the last part of your talk, summarizing, making a call to action, and opening up the Q&A session. Remember, it's important not just to summarize your talk, but also to leave your audience with a key message and a call to action. You're listening to Business English Pod, the Business English podcast for professionals on the move. Today, we're going to take another look at making presentations in English with the first in a 2-part series focused on question and answer, popularly referred to as Q&A. This listening takes place during a meeting of senior sales and marketing staff at Harper Toland, a global producer of special purpose steel. As we begin, Nick Fisher, the European sales director, is just finishing his presentation. Let's listen. Pay attention to how Nick and Nick's boss, Max, handle questions from Brian, the European marketing director, and Cindy, the regional sales manager for Germany.
Many thanks for your attention. So now, I'm very interested in hearing your comments.
Well, thank you very much. I'm sure we all agree that it's an interesting proposal.
Thank you.
Now, going back to what you were saying about our product lacking a clear value proposition. You're saying that our salespeople are not successfully differentiating our product from the competitors.
Yes, that's right. They're not communicating to the customer the experience of using ColorMax. Not just facts and figures, but what makes ColorMax different in terms the customer can relate to.
Then why would you say that our market surveys are ranking us 30% ahead of the competition in the key values that we are promoting?
That's a fair question, Brian. I know your team has worked very hard on the launch, and I've studied the latest survey results. But the proof is in the pudding. We have to ask ourselves, why aren't we selling more steel?
So you just don't lend any credence to the survey?
That's not what I'm saying.
With such positive results, has it occurred to you that it might be just a little bit too early to make such a sweeping indictment of our training?
Look, Brian, I didn't say the survey's not important, but all of us can read the numbers differently. It's a little like painting with figures sometimes. But the facts on the ground tell a different story. Why isn't our order volume going up?
Nonsense. I think you have to take into consideration the fact that we have a lag time.
Nick, Brian, hold your horses. I can see we're butting heads a little bit, and it's not productive. Let's use the time we have left to sound out Nick's proposal.
Can I come in here?
Go ahead, Cindy.
If we retrain all the salespeople,
Sorry, hold on a sec, Cindy. Perhaps that wasn't totally clear.
oh,
In the first phase, I'm just proposing we retrain the project engineers and key account managers, not the whole sales force. Just the people with the greatest customer contact.
all right, but it's still a lot of people.
Right, I can see what you're getting at. However, I expect that with proper implementation, we can get the job done in a month.
But how do we measure success?
You mean, how can we tell if it's working?
Yes, that's right.
That's a good question. I would expect to see a 5% increase in order volume 3 months after the rollout.
Let's go through the dialogue piece by piece to analyze how Nick and Nick's boss, Max, deal with questions. Of course, often the presenter is also the chairperson of the Q&A session. In this case, Nick and Max are sharing this duty, so we can learn from both of them. First of all, how does Nick open the Q&A session?
Many thanks for your attention. So now, I'm very interested in hearing your comments.
Of course, there are other phrases to open a Q&A session, and you can check BEP 33 for more examples. But let's get back to the Q&A. What's the first question Nick's asked? Brian, the European Marketing Director, is skeptical about Nick's proposal, but he's careful to start out gently by offering some polite praise. This is always a good idea, as it shows respect for the presenter.
Well, thank you very much. I'm sure we all agree that it's an interesting proposal.
Thank you.
Now, going back to what you were saying about our product lacking a clear value proposition.
Uh-huh.
What does Brian mean by value proposition? In marketing, a value proposition is how one intends to differentiate one's product from the offerings of competitors. Do you remember how Brian begins his question? He says, "Now, going back to what you were saying, this is a useful way to refer to an earlier point." Nick himself could use this way to bring up something he'd mentioned earlier simply by changing you to I. For example, going back to what I was saying about establishing a clear value proposition, there are more ways to refer to earlier points. Listen.
What exactly did you mean when you were talking about market forces?
I was interested in your comments about timing. Could you say a little more about that?
Could I just go back to the point you made about branding? Well, in my experience...
So, Brian has just referred back to the earlier point about establishing a clear value proposition. What happens next?
You're saying that our salespeople are not successfully differentiating our product from the competitors.
Brian clarifies Nick's earlier point to make sure he understood correctly and, perhaps, to state the situation to his advantage. He uses, "You're saying," to paraphrase Nick. To paraphrase means to restate something using different words. This is a useful skill in clarifying. We often paraphrase what we understood to check that it's correct. Then, notice how Nick paraphrases himself, partially to further clarify the point and, perhaps, to further restate the situation in a way that's advantageous to him.
Yes, that's right. They're not communicating to the customer the experience of using ColorMax. Not just facts and figures, but what makes ColorMax different in terms the customer can relate to.
It's interesting to note that in clarifying, we're not always just checking understanding, but also strategically restating the situation to our advantage. Later on in the dialogue, there's another example of clarifying.
But how do we measure success?
You mean, how can we tell if it's working?
Yes, that's right.
Cindy asks Nick, "How do we measure success?" Then, Nick, to make sure he understands, says, "You mean, how can we tell it's working?" "You're saying" and "you mean" are both ways to introduce a paraphrase for the purpose of clarification. Let's listen to some other ways to clarify.
Let me check I understand. Are you asking why our market share has increased?
Well, it all depends on what you mean by in the near future. Are you talking about next week? Or are we talking about the next 2 to 4 months?
Could you be a little more specific?
Let's go back again to the earlier part of the dialogue to examine how to deal with another kind of Q&A situation. What to do when you receive a hostile or aggressive question. Nick has just restated his belief that the poor sales are due to unclear communication to customers of value proposition. How does Brian respond?
Then why would you say that our market surveys are ranking us 30% ahead of the competition in the key values that we are promoting?
That's a fair question, Brian. I know your team has worked very hard on the launch, and I've studied the latest survey results.
Brian is on the attack here. He cites a market survey that seems to contradict Nick's belief that the value proposition is not being communicated to customers. Nick responds by saying, "That's a good question, Brian. I know your team has worked very hard. This is a kind of buffer, sometimes also called a softener or cushion. He uses this language to soften the disagreement that he expresses next. Using a buffer is one effective strategy for dealing with hostile questions. As a buffer, Nick could also say,
Thank you for your question.
That's a very interesting question.
I'm glad you asked that.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to comment on that.
Thank you for raising this point. You know, I really appreciate all your hard work.
Very good question.
Now that he's softened it with a buffer, how does Nick express his disagreement with Brian? He uses an idiom to describe his attitude to the marketing survey.
But the proof is in the pudding. We have to ask ourselves, why aren't we selling more steel?
The proof is in the pudding is a shortened version of the proof of the pudding is in the eating. Nowadays, people usually just say the proof is in the pudding. It means that the true quality or value of something can only be judged when it's tried and tested. The meaning can be summed up as results are what counts. So, Nick is saying that good market survey results are useless unless they translate into something real, profits. Understandably, Brian, as the marketing director, is not so happy about Nick's attacking the value of his market survey.
Nonsense. I think you have to take into consideration the fact that we have a lag time.
Nick, Brian, hold your horses. I can see we're butting heads a little bit, and it's not productive. Let's use the time we have left to sound out Nick's proposal. Max, who is the boss, gives us another good example of dealing with a hostile situation. He uses a couple of idiomatic expressions to calm everyone down. The informality of these idioms probably helps relax the situation. Hold your horses is used to ask someone to slow down. it usually implies that someone is moving too fast or assuming too much. Butting heads literally refers to two or more people or animals hitting each other with their heads, like deer. Max employs the softener a little to make the situation seem less serious. And he uses the inclusive we to remind everyone that we're a team. I can see that we're butting heads here a little. The image is humorous, which probably also works to smooth the situation. Now, Cindy has a question, but it seems as though she might not have been paying attention. What does she ask?
Can I come in here?
Go ahead, Cindy.
If we retrain all the salespeople,
Sorry, hold on a sec, Cindy. Perhaps that wasn't totally clear.
oh,
In the first phase, I'm just proposing we retrain the project engineers and key account managers, not the whole sales force.
Nick says, sorry, hold on a sec, Cindy. Perhaps that wasn't totally clear, to clear up a misunderstanding. A sec is an informal abbreviation for a second. It signals a relaxed tone. Also, earlier when Brian says Nick doesn't believe the market survey, do you remember how Nick replies?
So you just don't lend any credence to the survey.
That's not what I'm saying.
That's not what I'm saying is another way to clear up a misunderstanding. Here's some other language you could use.
Actually, let's go back to that point for a second. From what you're saying, I'm not sure that I made myself totally clear.
Oops, hold on a moment. I think there might be a slight misunderstanding about the scope of this project.
sorry, but that's not quite right. Instead of 70, 70, I meant 17, 17.
Since clearing up misunderstandings is such an important part in dealing with questions, let's practice that. First, you'll hear a cue or hint telling you where the misunderstanding is. For example, 40, not 30. Then you'll hear someone making a comment. For example, so what you're saying is our revenue has gone up 30%. Next, after the beep, correct the misunderstanding using the language we have just learned. In this example, you could say, oops, hold on a bit. I think there might be a little misunderstanding. Instead of 30%, it should be 40%. Note that it's often a good idea to put the correct information last, because that's what will stay in the listener's mind. All right, let's give it a try.
15, not 50.
When you're talking about adding sales staff, don't you think 50 is an awful lot? New orders, not market share.
Frankly, I just don't see how we're going to be able to increase market share by 5% over 6 months.
Retrain existing staff, not hire new staff.
From what you're proposing, I see a major problem being finding enough heads. How are you going to get 300 new staff?
And how did you do? Let's listen to some example answers. But remember, there are many possible correct ways to answer each question.
When you're talking about adding sales staff, don't you think 50 is an awful lot?
Oops, hold on a little bit. I think there might be a slight misunderstanding about the number I'm proposing. Instead of 50, I said 15, 1-5. Frankly, I just don't see how we're going to be able to increase market share by 5% over 6 months.
Sorry, I'm not sure I made myself totally clear. I meant increased new orders by 5%, not market share. From what you're proposing, I see a major problem being finding enough heads. How are you going to get 300 new staff?
Actually, let's go back to that point for a second. From what you're saying, I'm not sure that I made myself totally clear. Instead of hiring new staff, I'm proposing retraining existing staff.
After you've listened to the example exercises, it's always a good idea to go back and practice again for fluency. Try substituting new language for each example. Before we finish today's show, let's go back to the dialogue to examine one last point. Listen to Cindy and Nick continue their discussion. Nick has just said that he only wants to retrain project engineers and key account managers, not the whole sales force.
All right, but it's still a lot of people.
Right. I can see what you're getting at. However, I expect that with proper implementation, we can get the job done in a month.
Right, I can see what you're getting at, is a way to concede a point. That is, to admit that someone may be right. It's a kind of agreement and can also be used as a buffer or softener before you disagree. There are many more ways to concede a point. Let's look at a few.
Right. I can see what you're saying.
You may have a point there.
Yes, there's something to that.
Uh-huh. That makes sense.
All right, that's all for today's episode. Today, we've looked at a lot of effective skills and language for dealing with and asking questions. We've looked at opening a Q&A session, clarifying, referring back, dealing with hostility, and conceding a point. You've also studied some great business idioms. Thanks for listening. And hold your horses. We'll be back soon with the second in this two-part series on dealing with questions. See you then. You're listening to Business English Pod, the Business English podcast for professionals on the move. Welcome back to Business English Pod. Today's episode is the second in our two-part series on question and answer, or Q&A. The listening starts where we left off last time. Nick, the new European sales director at Harper Tolan Steel, is answering questions after his presentation. As you listen, pay attention to how Nick and Nick's boss Max deal with questions and manage the Q&A session.
But how do we measure success?
You mean, how can we tell if it's working?
Yes, that's right.
That's a good question. I would expect to see a 5% increase in order volume 3 months after the rollout, 10% within 6 months. That's the main criterion. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thanks. But I guess another general point I'd like to raise is about staffing.
Uh-huh.
With so much new blood coming into the company, a lot of sales staff feel that the writing's on the wall, and I think it's creating a bad atmosphere.
Let me check I understand. Are you asking about potential redundancies and how they might affect morale?
In a word, yes.
Well, everyone's job is on the line here. The most important thing is that we are fully committed to getting sales back on track.
I think that raises a different issue. We can address staff changes and morale in another meeting. Time's running short. Let's stay focused.
Okay. Well, I think we only have a few minutes left. Is there one last question?
Yes, if I can just come in for a second.
Yes, John.
Well, from what we're seeing on the UK side, the salespeople just don't feel our promotional materials are getting through to our most important customers. I'm talking about the decision makers, project managers, architects, etc. How do you think we can adjust?
That's a very interesting issue. but I'm not fully up to speed on the marketing situation in the UK. Brian, would you like to comment on that?
We can go into more detail about that in this afternoon's marketing meeting. But I would just like to point out that what you're saying just flat out contradicts the results from our market survey.
So, right. I'm afraid that's just about all we have time for.
Yes, thank you, Nick. We really are running on a tight schedule today, as I think everyone can appreciate. Now, Nick's proposal is definitely a go and needs our full support. Brian, I want your team to work with Nick's on the value proposition for the new training material and get back to me next Tuesday with a time frame for rollout. I'd like to have country managers retrain during next month's sales meeting, and we need to work fast. Okay, folks? Brian isn't going to be very happy about this, is he? Max is the boss, and he's made a decision. Nick's proposal is a go. That means he's going to adopt the proposal. You can also say, let's go with the proposal. Well now, let's go back through the dialogue to examine how Nick and Max deal with questions from Cindy, Brian, and John. We'll start with the exchange between Cindy, Nick, and Brian at the beginning of today's listening.
But how do we measure success?
You mean, how can we tell if it's working?
Yes, that's right.
That's a good question. I would expect to see a 5% increase in order volume 3 months after the rollout, 10% within 6 months. That's the main criterion. Does that answer your question?
First, Nick uses "you mean" to clarify Cindy's question about how to measure success. We covered this kind of clarifying in the first episode in this series, BEP 36. In response to Cindy's question, Nick says he expects a 5% increase in sales volume within 3 months after rollout or implementation of the new training. Then, Nick checks to make sure his answer is sufficient. Does that answer your question? This is a good way to make sure your audience is following you and to encourage discussion. There are other ways to check whether your answer is sufficient. Here are some of them.
Is that okay?
Does that make sense?
Do you see what I mean?
Do you know what I mean?
Are you with me?
Does that cover what you want to know?
Have I answered your question?
In today's listening, what comes next is another good example of clarifying. Cindy's talking about staff changes. Let's listen.
With so much new blood coming into the company, a lot of sales staff feel that the writing's on the wall, and I think it's creating a bad atmosphere.
Let me check I understand. Are you asking about potential redundancies and how they might affect morale?
In a word, yes.
As we learned in BEP 36, let me check I understand. Are you asking is another way to clarify someone's question. The reason Cindy's statement is vague and needs clarification is because she uses 2 idioms here, probably to give her tough question a casual tone in order to maintain a relaxed mood. New blood refers to new staff coming into the company. For example, we can inject new blood into a company. That is, bring in new people with fresh ideas. To see the writing on the wall suggests future doom or misfortune. You can refer to the study notes for a complete explanation of these idioms. So, with so much new blood coming into the company, a lot of sales staff feel that the writing's on the wall. This means that with so many new people coming into the company, a lot of staff are worried about their jobs. Now, let's go back to the dialogue. Remember, Cindy is asking about how staff changes are affecting morale. What does Nick say?
Well, everyone's job is on the line here. The most important thing is that we are fully committed to getting sales back on track.
Nick doesn't really answer Cindy's question, does he? This is a great example of tactfully or skillfully avoiding an answer by making a general statement. Nick says everyone's job is on the line. This means everyone's job is in danger. Max, their boss, then jumps into the discussion. Remember? I think that raises a different issue. We can address staff changes and morale in another meeting. Time's running short. Let's stay focused. Max is giving us examples of two useful skills here. The first is how to deal with an irrelevant question. The second is managing the time. Let's take them one by one. First, dealing with an irrelevant question. I think that raises a different issue is another way to avoid answering a question. It's particularly suitable for irrelevant questions when your goal is to keep the discussion on track. That is, to keep the conversation focused. Listen to some other ways to deal with an irrelevant question.
I'm afraid I don't see the connection.
To be honest, I think that brings up another point, and I'd rather not cover that for now.
I'm afraid that's outside the scope of my discussion.
If the point is relevant, but you simply can't or don't wish to answer, you might also consider saying something like,
I'm afraid I'm not in the position to comment on that.
I don't know that off the top of my head.
Can I get back to you on that?
If the question is something you think you already covered earlier, you can then say,
I think I answered that earlier.
Well, as I said...
Well, as I mentioned earlier...
I think I addressed that point earlier on, but I'd be happy to discuss this with you after the meeting.
But what do you do if the question is relevant, but you want to answer it later? Listen to what Brian says later on in the dialogue when Nick asks him about the marketing situation in the UK.
Brian, would you like to comment on that?
You could also say,
I'll be happy to answer that later when we talk about product awareness.
Can we come back to that issue in a bit when we go through the targets for 2007?
Let's put off that topic for now. I'd like to deal with that in more detail during the sales meeting tomorrow when the whole team is present.
So, we've covered how to avoid answering unwanted questions. Now, let's review how Max controls the timing. He says, time's running short. Let's stay focused. When time is running short, that means time is running out. Just like when your car is running out of fuel. The fuel in the tank gets lower and lower. There are several more great examples of controlling the timing in today's listening. Nick says,
Okay. Well, I think we only have a few minutes left. Is there one last question?
And near the end of the session, Nick and Max both use useful expressions for controlling the timing. Nick says, I'm afraid that's just about all we have time for. Is there one last question? Max says, we really are running on a tight schedule today, as I think everyone can appreciate. These are both great expressions. There are also other phrases you can use to control the timing.
Let's try to keep the discussion on track. Can we get back to the main point?
As we're short of time, I'll have to come to that later, perhaps during the break.
I'm afraid that's all we have time for. Thank you very much for your attention.
So, now we have just one more skill to cover today, redirecting a question. This means giving a question to someone else to answer. Nick does this with John's question about whether HarperToland's promotional materials are getting through to the key customers in their UK market. He says,
That's a very interesting issue. but I'm not fully up to speed on the marketing situation in the UK. Brian, would you like to comment on that?
To be not fully up to speed on something means not to be fully informed about it. Marketing is Brian's area of expertise, and because Nick is not fully informed about it, or perhaps wants to put some pressure on Brian, he redirects the question to Brian by saying, "Brian, would you like to comment on that?" This is redirecting the question to another person. Let's listen to some more examples.
That's a good question, but I'm afraid it's not really my field. Ms. Smith, can you help to answer that?
George, I think you know more about this. What do you think?
Great question. It's a little outside of my job scope, though. Maybe Simon. Do you want to answer that?
In addition to redirecting to another person, there are also other ways to redirect a question. You can redirect to the whole group. This is a great way to encourage discussion. Here are some examples.
Would anyone like to comment on that?
Has anyone else had a similar problem?
Great question. What do others think?
That's a good question. Let's go around the table and get some other views on this.
Finally, there's one last way to redirect a question. You can turn back the question to the questioner and let him answer it. This is called redirecting to the questioner. It's particularly useful when it's obvious that someone doesn't really want to ask a question, but rather wants to express an opinion. To redirect to the questioner, you can say,
I think that's a very interesting question. I'd be really interested to hear what you have to say on that issue.
You must have thought quite a lot about this. What do you think?
That's a very interesting question. Could I ask you what your own view is?
You might try that one next time in a job interview when someone asks you a tough question. Just kidding. Actually, that would probably not be a good idea. Let's look at a situation where redirecting to the questioner is useful.
I've been thinking a lot about this market survey. Don't you think we have a great chance to boost our sales in Vietnam?
That's an interesting question. You must have thought quite a lot about this. What's your view?
Well, there is a quickly growing middle class segment with elderly parents that have strong purchasing power. That means
Now let's practice. You'll hear a series of questions. After each beep, respond to the question appropriately by redirecting either to the questioner, the group, or someone else on your team. Brian is in charge of marketing, so he can answer questions about that. Are you ready? Let's give it a try.
Well, I've been thinking a lot about your proposal. Don't you think this is a good opportunity for us to move into new markets?
Don't you think there is some way we can get the training done faster? Surely someone must have some ideas.
What I'd really like to know more about is the marketing situation in Central Europe.
Well, how did it go? Let's listen to some example answers for you to compare.
Well, I've been thinking a lot about your proposal. Don't you think this is a good opportunity for us to move into new markets?
That's an interesting question. You must have thought quite a lot about this. What's your own view on that?
Don't you think there is some way we can get the training done faster? Surely someone must have some ideas.
That's a good question. Let's go around the table and get some other views on this.
What I'd really like to know more about is the marketing situation in Central Europe.
That's a good question, but I'm afraid it's not really my field. Brian, can you help to answer that?
For further practice, it's always a good idea to go back and try again. Substitute different expressions to build fluency. Great. That just about brings us to the end of today's episode. This was the second in a two-part series on dealing with questions. Today, we covered several important skills for Q&A: avoiding answering, dealing with irrelevant questions, and redirecting. We've also learned several useful idioms. This unit also concludes our discussion of the skills and language of presentations. We've covered a lot of material over these 9 units. Let's briefly review what we've learned. 1. How to introduce your presentation and get your audience's attention. 2. Important signposting language that will make the structure of your talk very clear. 3. Dealing with visuals. 4. Describing charts and graphs and emphasizing key points. 5. Analyzing data and making predictions. 6. How to use your voice effectively in a presentation. And 7. Great strategies for how to deal with questions. Let's end with some general practice tips. A great way to review is by using the skills we've studied in your own presentations. You may wish to videotape or record your practice sessions and get feedback from a friend. Finally, on a personal note from me, Clayton Lee, let me wish you all good luck in your studies and your careers. Keep reviewing and practicing. Armed with the strategies and language we've covered in these lessons, we'll all be presenting for success. Thanks for listening and take care. You're listening to Business English Pod, the Business English podcast for professionals on the move. Do you ever need to persuade or convince someone of your point of view? Do you need to win support for a proposal or get backing for a project? Of course you do. Persuasion, convincing someone of something, is an essential part of almost everything we do, from informal discussions to formal negotiations. To be successful, you need to be persuasive. You need to get people to accept a different point of view, to see things your way. How can you be more persuasive? In this 3-part series, we'll be giving you some of the answers. Throughout the years, many talented speakers and researchers have been developing ways to persuade people effectively. One of the most widely used methods is Alan H. Monroe's. In the mid-1930s, Monroe created a persuasive process called the Monroe sequence that has become a standard in business, media, and politics. Once you know it, you'll recognize it everywhere, in speeches, statements, proposals, and advertisements. It's popular because it's logical and effective. So, over the next 3 episodes, we'll be studying language and strategies for persuasion based on the Monroe sequence. The Monroe sequence has 5 parts. First, get the audience's attention. Second, establish a need. Third, satisfy that need. Fourth, visualize the future. And fifth, ask for action. This show will focus on the first step, getting the audience's attention. The listening takes place at Swift, a bicycle manufacturer whose major market is the U.S. We'll be listening to a good example and a bad example of persuasion. First, let's examine the bad example. Franz Barbosa is the new production supervisor at a Swift factory in Brazil, where most of the company's manufacturing is done. In one room in the production center, employees work on welding bike frames. To weld means to use a hot flame to attach metal parts. During the summer, when the temperature outside is 31 degrees centigrade, the temperature in the welding room is over 37 degrees. Last year, 19 out of 36 workers quit because they could not bear the heat. This turnover happens every summer. To solve this problem, Franz has gone to Swift Management to request they insulate and air condition the production center, which would cost $300,000. To insulate means add material to the walls to protect the room from heat. Air condition refers to using a machine to keep the room cool. Unfortunately, it's not possible to air condition the welding room alone. Here are the listening questions for the first dialogue. First, whose needs does Franz focus on? That is, whose needs is he taking into consideration when he makes the proposal? And second, why is Franz's proposal so ineffective?
My proposal is simple. Please put air conditioning in the welding room. This past summer, 1/3 of our employees quit because it was so hot. It's not fair that they have to work in unbearable temperatures while we managers sit in our air-conditioned offices. I propose that we solve this problem by air conditioning the welding room to bring down the temperature to 30 degrees. Insulating and air conditioning the welding room would cost about $300,000. I urge you to approve this request. Thank you.
Sorry, Franz. What exactly is your point? How do we justify this?
It doesn't sound like Franz's boss is very supportive of this proposal. Why is Franz so unsuccessful, so unpersuasive? To answer this problem, let's go back to the listening questions. Whose needs does Franz focus on? In other words, whose perspective is he viewing the problem from? Remember, Franz says of the workers,
It's not fair that they have to work in unbearable temperatures while we managers sit in our air-conditioned offices.
So, obviously Franz is viewing the problem from the worker's perspective. Of course, there's nothing wrong with this, but from the management's point of view, it's not very persuasive. In this situation, as in so many cases, what's good for the workers is also good for the business. However, to be persuasive, Franz needs to discuss the issue in terms of the management's needs. Predictably, a couple of years later, Franz has been fired. His replacement, Steve Siddell, makes the same proposal to install air conditioning in the production center. Now, the price of insulation and air conditioning has risen to $500,000. But with such a high staff turnover, the company is losing money every summer. Let's listen to how Steve starts off his presentation. While you listen, see if you can answer these questions. You can check your answers in a few days at www.businessenglishpod.com. First, what does Steve do at the beginning of his presentation? And second, whose needs does Steve focus on? The workers or the management's?
Swift lost $181,000 in profits last summer due to a 16% drop in productivity in our production center here. That's not unusual. This factory has a history of low summer productivity. But if I told you we could reverse the trend and bring summer productivity in line with the rest of the year, would you be interested?
What do you have in mind, Steve?
Well, the problem starts in the welding room.
Steve's proposal is off to a good start, isn't it? His introduction is so effective for two main reasons. First, he gets the audience's attention. Second, he focuses on his audience's needs, which in this case is how can Swift save money? The first step in the Monroe sequence is getting the audience's attention. If no one's listening, your words will have no impact. To persuade people effectively, you first need to make sure they're paying attention. There are many ways you can do this. For example, you can pose a problem.
How can we increase the scale of our business without hiring more staff?
Have you ever wondered why our electricity costs are higher in the winter than they are in the summer? Well, if I could show you a way to reverse this trend, would you be interested?
You can also ask a rhetorical question. A rhetorical question is a question that you answer yourself or one that everyone already knows the answer to.
Can we afford to lose any more clients? No, of course not.
Do we need to cut costs? Are we looking for ways to increase sales? Yes, of course we are.
One of the best ways to get attention is to make a startling or surprising statement.
Here's a little known fact. Last year, our workers averaged only 3 hours of productive time per day.
It's hard to believe, but our raw materials costs have gone up by 37% in the last 2 months.
Another thing you can do is tell a story. Everyone likes to hear a good story, especially when it involves the people present. How can you begin a story?
You know, when I first started working in this company 5 years ago,
When I think about all the hard work we have put into this marketing campaign, I remember our first meeting together in January.
Some people like to use an interesting quotation that's relevant to their topic. How do you introduce a quotation?
Mark Twain once said, "There are lies, damned lies, and statistics."
I am reminded of the famous words of chess master Tartikover. Victory goes to the player who makes the next to last mistake.
Many audiences like it when you tell a joke or make a humorous comment.
I think most of you will agree. What do salespeople usually mean when they say a product is new? They mean it's a different color from the previous design.
Who here can tell me what a management consultant is? It's a person who solves a problem you didn't know you had in a way you don't understand.
Finally, as the old saying goes, a picture is worth 1,000 words. Many speakers find that first showing the audience a picture is a great way to create interest.
Have a look at this graph. As you can see, despite a rise in profits, our return on investment has plummeted over the last 3 years.
As the old adage goes, a picture is worth 1,000 words. Now, take a look at this.
Take a look at this before and after picture. On the left, you see our factory before the renovation. On the right, after.
Can you think of more ways to get the audience's attention? I'm sure you can. No matter which way you choose, and you're not limited to one, you can combine them. The main point is to establish relevance to the audience. Establishing relevance means showing that what we have to say is important to them. How does Steve do this? He combines two of the strategies we've just studied. First, he makes a startling statement.
Swift lost $181,000 in profits last summer due to a 16% drop in productivity in our production center here.
Then he poses a problem.
That's not unusual. This factory has a history of low summer productivity. But if I told you we could reverse the trend and bring summer productivity in line with the rest of the year, would you be interested?
Usually, it's best to keep the attention step brief, as Steve has done. Ask yourself, how can I create the greatest amount of interest with the fewest amount of words? Now it's your turn to practice. This practice will focus on just two of the attention-getting strategies: posing problems and making startling statements. First, you'll hear the name of the strategy, either problem or startling statement. Then you'll hear some information. After the beep, create a sentence based on the information you hear. For startling statements, you can say things like, "Here's a little known fact," or "It's hard to believe, but," or "Did you know?" For posing problems, you can use language like, "Have you ever wondered why?" and "What if?" or "What if I told you?" For example, if you hear, "Problem, marketing budget cut by 75%. How do we promote our product?" You could say something like, "What if I told you your marketing budget was cut by 75%? How would you go about promoting your product?" After each exercise, we'll play an example answer that you can compare with your own. Are you ready? Let's begin.
Q1. Problem. Hold fewer meetings, but improve communication.
Answer. What if I told you there was a way to hold fewer meetings and improve communication? Would you be interested?
Q2. Startling statement. McDonald's is the #1 owner of property in the world.
Answer. Here's a little known fact. McDonald's is the #1 owner of property in the world.
Q3. Problem. Half of new businesses fail within 4 years.
Answer. Have you ever wondered why half of new businesses fail within 4 years of starting up?
Q4. Startling statement. 75% of US employees are looking for a new job.
Answer. Did you know that 75% of US employees are looking for a new job?
How did you do? Go back and try them again. After you've practiced a couple times, try substituting language. How does saying the same thing in different ways change the impact of your statement? That's all for today's show. Today we've covered the first step in the Monroe sequence, an effective process for persuading people to accept your ideas. In the second episode in this series, we'll study the next step. We'll see how Steve carefully builds up a vivid picture of the problem until his audience is literally begging him for a solution. Then, in the third episode, we'll look at the remaining 3 parts of the persuasive sequence: the satisfaction step, the visualization step, and the action step. Remember to read the study notes for this and other episodes, which you can sign up for at www.businessenglishpod.com. There, you'll find a complete transcript, vocabulary, and additional practice. Thanks for listening, and see you next time. Want to get more out of Business English Pod? Then go to www.businessenglishpod.com and sign up as a premium member. premium members can access detailed study notes and the new phrasecast to practice all the useful language we featured today. You're listening to Business English Pod, the business English podcast for professionals on the move. Welcome to the second in this three-part series on persuasion. What are the 5 steps of the persuasive process? Let's review the Monroe sequence. First, get the audience's attention. Second, establish a need. Third, satisfy that need. Fourth, visualize the future. And finally, ask for action. Last time, we heard a bad example and a good example of persuasion. Then we covered the first step of the Monroe sequence. We learned that to be persuasive, you first need to get the audience's attention by establishing the relevance of the topic. We also talked about how it's extremely important to relate your proposal directly to your audience's needs. In today's show, we'll be continuing on that theme by looking in detail at the second step in the Monroe sequence, the need step. This is where you demonstrate to the audience that there is a serious problem with the current situation. This prepares them psychologically to accept your solution. Let's continue listening to the good example of persuasion that we started last time. Remember, Steve has just gotten his audience's attention by pointing out the amount of money that Swift loses every year due to turnover. He has also posed a problem. How can we reverse the trend and turn the situation around? During the listening, you'll hear Steve's managers, Glenn and Sally, make occasional comments as Steve presents his idea. And while you listen, see if you can answer these questions. You can check your answers in a few days on the website. First, what is the highest temperature in the welding room? Second, what does Steve present first, the problem or the solution? And finally, what kind of strategies does Steve use to paint a vivid picture of the need for a solution?
And bring summer productivity in line with the rest of the year. Would you be interested?
What do you have in mind, Steve?
Well, the problem starts in the welding room. Due to high turnover and low efficiency from replacement workers, we just don't make as many frames as we do during the rest of the year. And if we don't have frames, we can't make bikes.
Where's the high turnover come from?
Good question. Both the high turnover and low efficiency are because of the extreme heat in the welding room. Temperatures average 6 degrees over the outside temperatures. During the summer, when the work starts at 8, it's already 31 degrees in the welding room. By 11:30, it's at least 37. On 6 days last summer, it hit 41 degrees.
That's hot.
Yes, and when the temperatures are that high, we may be violating government regulations. And as you know, these production workers are always working on moving or carrying frames, which weigh as much as 8 kilos. When temperatures hit 35 degrees, they slow down. With no relief in sight, many of them quit.
How many was it again last year?
Well, this summer we have already replaced 11 of the 36 employees in the welding room. Turnover for the whole summer will usually run over 50%. When someone quits, it takes an average of 5 days to find and train a replacement. During that time, the trainee produces nothing. For another 5 days, the new person can work at only about half speed. According to my calculations, we are producing 12,300 less units per summer than we would without this turnover.
Wow, 12,300. Is it really that much?
Yes, and figuring a profit of $16 on every bike we sell, those 12,300 products we aren't making are costing us $200,000 in potential earnings.
That's pretty significant. What will it take to fix the problem?
So far, Steve has not yet said a single word about the solution to his problem, has he? Up to this point, he has just been focusing on establishing a clear need. This is a key strategy in the Monroe sequence. First, demonstrate a serious problem with the current situation. When the audience feels a clear need to solve the problem, they'll be ready to accept your proposal. This form of persuasion, presenting the need before the solution, is often called the indirect method. When is the indirect method more appropriate than a direct approach? You'll have to rely on your knowledge of the situation, the culture, and the audience to make that judgment. Generally, the direct method, giving the solution first, may be more useful when you're dealing with a small problem or when you know the individuals involved very well. But there is no doubt that indirect persuasion is a powerful tool. As Monroe would say, by following the natural human decision-making process, first, we feel a need, then we look for a solution, you can more easily overcome all kinds of resistance or opposition to your ideas. How does Steve establish a need for his proposal? Let's look at some language he uses. First, he discusses the origin or beginning of the problem.
Well, the problem starts in the welding room.
What are some other ways you can refer to the origin of a problem?
Well, this issue goes back to a communication breakdown.
The root cause of the problem has to do with lack of supervision and poor training.
We can trace the origin of this issue to poor implementation of risk controls.
Next, Steve explains the background of the problem.
Due to high turnover and low efficiency from replacement workers, we just don't make as many frames as we do during the rest of the year. And if we don't have frames, we can't make bikes.
Steve is building up the reasons for the problem here. He's painting a vivid picture of the causes. What are some other phrases you can use to do this?
Because of an overall decrease in the numbers of face-to-face meetings, our staff just don't get to know each other. So that basic element of trust is lacking.
Owing to high turnover, there are really no qualified mentors in this team. On top of that, management has not been conducting sufficient oversight of new hires.
Since every local office had its own vested interests, there was very little willingness to submit to central oversight.
Note again that we haven't said anything yet about the solution. In the indirect method of persuasion, we must avoid talking about the solution at all costs until we have established a clear need. The mistake most often made by beginners and inexperienced persuaders is that they start talking about the solution much too early in their presentations. Now, let's practice what you've learned so far today. In a moment, you'll be hearing a series of hints or cues. First, you'll hear the origin of a problem, then some words explaining the background. Use the phrases we have just studied to make a short statement on the origin and background of each issue. For example, if you hear high summer temperatures, increased use of air conditioners, lack of electricity, you'll say something like, "The root cause of this problem is the high summer temperatures. Because of increased use of air conditioners, we're facing a lack of electricity." Feel free to invent details. Then, after each exercise, you'll hear an example answer that you can compare with your own.
Poor training, poor computer knowledge, waste of time. Answer.
The root cause of this problem is poor training. Because we have poor computer knowledge, we end up wasting a lot of time.
Overuse of photocopier. Too much personal use, a lot of paper gets wasted. Answer.
This issue goes back to the overuse of the photocopier. Because staff are using it for personal use, a lot of paper gets wasted.
Increased cost. Excessive prices lose customers. Answer.
We can trace the origin of this problem to increased costs. Owing to excessive prices, we lose a lot of customers.
How did you do? It's a good idea to go back and try the practice again to build up fluency. Also, try substituting different language to help build up a range of expressions. Now, let's get back to the dialogue. So far, we've studied talking about the origin and background of the problem. What are some other ways that Nick uses to establish a clear need for his proposal? For one thing, Nick paints a vivid picture of the conditions in the welding room as the temperature increases throughout the day.
During the summer, when the work starts at 8, it's already 31 degrees in the welding room. By 11:30, it's at least 37. On 6 days last summer, it hit 41 degrees.
This is a kind of detailed example that illustrates the problem. As he continues demonstrating the problem, another way that Steve adds persuasiveness to his presentation is by relating to the audience's own knowledge of the issue.
And as you know, these production workers are always working on, moving, or carrying frames, which weigh as much as 8 kilos.
As you know, is a way of using your listener's own knowledge as a tool of persuasion. This is an effective strategy. What are some other ways to refer to the audience's knowledge?
I know the people in this room would be the first ones to tell me that trust is essential to a harmonious and productive work environment.
As you can all appreciate, excellent training and supervision are essential to our work.
I don't need to tell you that we must have adequate oversight of branch office accounting practices.
Another way that Steve demonstrates need is to use numbers to very good effect. Though he's careful not to overwhelm his audience with statistics, he does know his figures. Last time we heard about a 16% drop in productivity and a $181,000 loss in potential profits. This time, he mentions that the welding room has already replaced 11 of 36 employees, and turnover for the summer will often usually run over 50%. Let's listen to one of Steve's particularly effective use of statistics.
According to my calculations, we are producing 12,300 less units per summer than we would without this turnover.
According to my calculations is a great way to introduce numbers. What are some other ways to quote figures?
The latest statistics demonstrate that new workers are taking, on average, 65% longer to become fully trained.
Our numbers show that as much as 5% of earnings are being wasted on excessive tax payments due to outdated accounting procedures.
Let's continue on with the theme of using numbers to add persuasive weight to the problem. Nothing is more convincing than talking about the bottom line. The bottom line refers to the last line on a company's profit and loss statement. It tells us whether we made a profit or a loss. Idiomatically, bottom line also means the net result or the final analysis. In the need step, it's a good idea to provide a vivid summary of the business impact of the problem in terms of profit or loss, the bottom line. Let's listen to how Nick does this.
And figuring a profit of $16 on every bike we sell, those 12,300 products we aren't making are costing us $200,000 in potential earnings.
What are some other ways to talk about the bottom line?
The bottom line is that this lack of trust between business units has resulted in at least a 45% drop in customer retention.
Taking into account this loss in productivity, poor training, and lack of oversight have incurred immeasurable costs.
In a nutshell, poor implementation of risk management systems at the local level could be costing us as much as $22.5 million per year.
To sum up, in your need step, you will make a convincing demonstration of the problem and how it directly affects your audience. In business, this usually means using figures to paint a vivid picture of a clear business need in terms of profit and loss. However, depending on the situation and your audience, you may also want to talk about how the problem affects their health, happiness, security, or other interests. It's no accident that Steve spends the majority of his time on the need step. By the end of this step, your listeners should be so concerned about the problem that they're looking, searching, even begging for a solution. They're now psychologically prepared for your answer to their problem. That's where the next step comes in, satisfying the need. We'll be taking a close look at this step, as well as visualizing the future and asking for action, in the third and final episode of this series. In the meantime, let me remind you to sign up for a free trial of our new online exercises at www.businessenglishpod.com. We've put together lots of great activities to help you practice English, including online quizzes and listening exercises. So be sure to stop by. Want to get more out of Business English Pod? Then go to www.businessenglishpod.com and sign up as a premium member. Premium members can access detailed study notes and the new Phrasecast to practice all the useful language we featured today. You're listening to Business English Pod, the business English podcast for professionals on the move. In the first two shows in this three-part series on persuasion, we saw how getting your audience's attention and demonstrating a clear need were essential to the persuasive process. We learned that in the indirect method of persuasion, you should demonstrate the problem before you offer a solution. This mirrors the psychological process of decision-making. First, we feel a need. Then, we look for a way to satisfy that need. That's why you'll spend the majority of your speech clearly describing the need and how it directly affects your audience's interests. In business, usually this means giving one or two vivid examples of the problem, where you quote figures, and it means making a convincing statement of how the problem affects the company's profit. By the end of this step, your audience should be so concerned about the problem that they're ready to accept your solution. Then, and only then, should you start talking about your proposal. This is the satisfaction step. After you've briefly described your proposal or the solution to the problem, you will then paint a picture of the future. This is the visualization step. Talk about how accepting your proposal will have positive future outcomes, or maybe how not accepting it will have negative outcomes. Finally, you need to make a concrete, specific call to action, what the audience can do right now to implement your proposal. Let's finish listening to Steve give his proposal to Swift Management. See if you can identify the satisfaction, visualization, and action steps in his speech. Also, while you listen, try to answer the following questions. First, how long will it take Swift to get back the investment in air conditioning? Second, how much extra profit can Swift make per year by adopting Nick's proposal? Third, what specific action does Steve ask his managers to take?
What will it take to fix the problem?
Well, bringing down the temperature to 30 degrees will require an investment of around $500,000 to insulate and air condition the welding room. Extra energy costs for the air conditioning will run about another $30,000 a year. We get our investment back in under 3 years. By then, we'll be making at least an extra $200,000 per year, all without buying more equipment or hiring more workers.
So what would you like us to do?
Well, by installing the insulation and air conditioning this fall, we can take advantage of lower off-season rates. Please authorize the purchasing department to request bids for the system. Then, next summer, our productivity will be the highest ever.
Sounds like a go to me.
Yes, why haven't we done this before?
From Steve's manager's reactions, we can see that his proposal has been successful. Steve's success is mainly due to the vivid and convincing demonstration of need that he made in episode 2. But to complete the persuasive process, he must satisfy that need, paint a vivid picture of the future impact, and ask for concrete action. Let's go through the end of Steve's speech in detail to see how he accomplishes all these 3 steps. After spending more than 60% of his presentation on describing the need, Steve's description of his actual proposal, the satisfaction step, is forceful and concise. He doesn't need to say a lot because his audience is already so concerned about the problem that they're almost begging for a solution.
Well, bringing down the temperature to 30 degrees will require an investment of around $500,000 to insulate and air condition the welding room. Extra energy costs for the air conditioning will run about another $30,000 a year. We get our investment back in under 3 years.
One of the main points to note here is that Steve is well prepared. He knows how much his proposal costs, he knows how long it will take to get the money back, and he knows how it will impact the company's profit. Basically, the satisfaction step is a statement of benefit to the audience. Grammatically, there are many ways to do this. For example, we can say something like, doing A will give us B benefit. A ensures that we can do B, or A will help us to do B. Let's listen to some more examples of strong, concise satisfaction step statements.
Holding quarterly team building training is an effective way to counter this problem.
I propose establishing a mentoring system to deal with this problem.
Making regular visits to local sites will help us to create an effective supervision regime.
After you've satisfied the audience's need, the next step in the Monroe sequence is to visualize the future. Visualize means to make a mental picture of something. Again, visualization mirrors the next stage in the psychological process of making a decision. First, we feel a need. Then, we think of a solution. Then, we imagine how it will feel to implement that solution. The visualization step helps make your audience more emotionally committed to your plan. How does Steve do this? Remember, he's just said that in 3 years, Swift will have made the money back that they invested in air conditioning.
By then, we'll be making at least an extra $200,000 per year, all without buying more equipment or hiring more workers.
Steve keeps the visualization step short and sweet. Generally, briefer is better. Think of the mental picture you want to leave with your audience. Give it to them, then move on to the action step. Let's listen to some more examples of language we could use for the visualization step.
Under this plan, Swift is going to be a better place to work, with employees enjoying harmonious relationships and greater job satisfaction. Within 2 years, we could see as much as a 27% increase in productivity.
Imagine this. With an effective mentor program, not only will we increase retention of high potential employees, we will also see our production line working like a well-oiled machine.
By implementing this plan immediately, the company will see tangible results by the end of the month.
So far, in our examples, we've visualized a positive future, good things that will happen if your audience accepts your proposal or solution. It is, however, also possible to imagine a negative outcome, bad things that will happen if the audience does not accept the proposal.
If we don't adopt this proposal, there's no telling what could happen.
Without quick action, the situation is going to get worse and worse. Inaction will just cause us to lose more money.
If we don't do anything, the situation is just going to deteriorate.
Finally, you can use a contrastive method where you compare the negative outcome if your solution is not accepted to the positive outcome if it is.
If we don't take decisive action, our losses for 2007 will be unrecoverable. But by implementing rigorous oversight now, we can recover any potential losses before they occur.
Of course, the method you choose depends on the proposal and the people involved. After you've finished visualizing the future, the last step in the persuasive process is the action step. This is where you'll make a clear call to action. Tell your audience what you want them to do right now. Make your request specific and make it as easy as possible for them to act. Let's listen to Steve again.
Please authorize the purchasing department to request bids for the system. Then, next summer, our productivity will be the highest ever.
Steve's call to action is, please authorize the purchasing department to request bids for the system. Notice also that before he ends his talk, he leaves his audience with a quick final visualization of a very positive future outcome. Next summer, our productivity will be the highest ever. Let's hear some more ways to make calls to action.
To sum up, we need quick action and we need it now. So I'd appreciate everyone's support for this proposal.
Please authorize a purchase order for a new computer system.
The first thing we need to do is meet with all the parties involved. I suggest next Thursday.
I need all of your help to understand the problem better. That's why I'm asking you all to send me an email anytime you observe something unusual.
It's not good enough just to meet our targets. I challenge all of you to exceed them by at least 5%, starting today.
Now it's your turn to practice. Imagine you're making a cost-saving proposal. Like Steve, you've suggested air conditioning the production center, which will save the company $200,000 per year. Within 3 years, you get the investment back. You've just finished the satisfaction step, and now you need to visualize the future and ask for action. First, use one of the phrases to visualize a negative outcome, such as, "Inaction will just cause us to lose more money," or, "If we don't do anything, the situation is just going to deteriorate." Then, visualize the future benefit to the company. And finally, ask for action. What do you want the management team to do? Are you ready? First, take a few seconds to think, then start speaking after the beep.
If we don't do anything about these high temperatures, the situation is just going to deteriorate. Inaction will just cause us to lose more money. But by installing air conditioning this fall, we can start saving $200,000 per year. Within 3 years, we will have made our money back. Please authorize a purchase request immediately.
How did you do? Of course, there are many possible good answers. Another way to practice is to take one of your own company's problems and take it through the different steps of the Monroe sequence. Use the language we've just learned in this and the previous 2 episodes to create a persuasive proposal. What were the 5 steps of the persuasive process? Before we finish the series, let's review. First, get the audience's attention. Second, establish a need. Third, satisfy that need. 4, visualize the future. And finally, ask for action. One of the reasons that the Monroe sequence is so effective is that it mirrors the natural human decision-making process. First, we have a problem. Then, we look for a solution to that problem. Of course, in some situations, perhaps for small things or when you know the people involved quite well, it may be better to use a direct approach, where you state the solution, then justify the solution afterwards. However, many inexperienced presenters make the mistake of ignoring the power and usefulness of the indirect approach that we've studied in this series. Getting your audience's attention ensures that they're listening. Establishing a clear need helps you overcome opposition to your solution. If done correctly, the need step should leave your audience so concerned about the problem that they're almost begging for a solution. After you've shown them how to satisfy that need by adopting your proposal, visualizing the future helps them become more emotionally committed to your solution. Finally, a clear call to action is essential to get real results. We're confident that this 3-part series on the persuasive process has introduced you to useful strategies and language that will make you more successful in persuading others of your ideas and proposals. For further practice, let me remind you to sign up for a free trial of our new online exercises at www.businessenglishpod.com. Want to get more out of Business English Pod? Then go to www.businessenglishpod.com and sign up as a premium member. Premium members can access detailed study notes and the new Phrasecast to practice all the useful language we featured today. You're listening to Business English Pod, the business English podcast for professionals on the move. Before we get started, let me remind you that you can sign up for a free trial of our online learning activities by visiting www.businessenglishpod.com. Registering costs nothing, and you'll be able to explore all the online language practice and exercises in the Learning Center. Now, following on from our episode on hosting a site visit, we return to our friends at the railway tunnel to look at how you can present your products and services to potential clients. Stanley Wong is a site agent for a railway construction project in Western China. He has just taken Matt and Paula, sales engineers from a small American company, on a tour of the tunnel. Now, in the evening, Stanley and his boss Bill Zhong are hosting a dinner for Matt and Paula. The group is discussing possibilities for future cooperation. In many countries and cultures around the world, informal occasions, such as a friendly meal or a game of golf, are more important to the sales process than a formal presentation in the boardroom. And so in this episode, we'll be studying language for presenting our products in such casual situations. In particular, we'll see how you can sell your products in relation to your customers' needs with a few soft sell techniques. As you listen, think about the following questions. Answers will be posted in a few days on www.businessenglishpod.com. First, were Matt and Paula able to go to the tunnel face, that is, the end of the tunnel? Second, what is the main point of interest that Matt and Paula pursue in the discussion? And finally, what are the advantages that Matt and Paula's device have over traditional surveying methods?
So what do you think, Matt? Can you help us?
Well, let me turn the question around for a minute.
Okay.
One of the things that I heard today, and it's kind of interesting, is that you're dealing with a lot of groundwater.
Yes, indeed.
And I just wanted to get a clearer picture because I know that high-pressure water can be a big safety issue, not to mention the delays.
Absolutely. Safety aspect is a priority, and obviously we'd like to minimize delays. In the last week alone, we've lost nearly 2 days.
So, it's fair to say that accurate detection of groundwater is a big concern.
It certainly is.
Well, that's just what the vision sensor is designed for.
Yeah, we know. It's one of the main reasons we asked you down.
And compared with traditional surveying methods, our unit has a few major advantages.
Uh-huh.
The sensor is wireless, so you don't have cables running around everywhere.
Definitely a plus.
Yeah, and this equipment is also much easier to operate than conventional systems.
You don't have to mess around with dynamite and heavy seismograph equipment.
Best of all, it will hardly affect work. You can take a survey in less than 30 minutes, then just keep going.
That would certainly help.
So what would it take to run a test survey?
Well, actually, we brought all the equipment with us. All we need is a drill and some accelerometers.
It sounds like Matt and Paula are well on the way to making a sale, doesn't it? Let's study how they analyze the customer's needs and talk about their product's advantages. We'll also look at some language from the customer's perspective. For example, how to ask about benefits. How does the dialogue begin? Bill gets straight to the point.
So what do you think, Matt? Can you help us?
This is a way of starting the discussion. Basically, Bill is asking about the advantages to his company. He wants to know what Matt and Paula's product can do for him. There are many other possible phrases we can use to turn the discussion to business.
Well, let's get straight to the point.
Do you think your product has an application on our site?
We'd be very curious to learn more about the benefits of your device.
What kind of advantages does your system have over the one we're using now?
Now it's Matt and Paula's turn to reply. Matt asks,
Well, let me turn the question around for a minute.
Matt turns the question around to get more information from Bill and Stanley. It's good sales to understand the customer's needs thoroughly before saying too much about our own product. Matt first wants to give Bill and Stanley an opportunity to talk more about the challenges they're facing. People love to talk about themselves and their work, so this is usually a very successful strategy. What are some other ways to turn the question around?
Well, first, let me make sure I understand exactly what you're facing.
Let me just ask a couple of questions first.
We'd really like to hear more about your current setup.
Is it all right if I turn the question around?
Next, Matt wants to raise a point of interest, that is, bring up an area of discussion that may lead to a sale.
One of the things that I heard today, and it's kind of interesting, is that you're dealing with a lot of groundwater.
Yes, indeed.
This is an example of a soft sell. That is, Matt is not pushing the issue too hard. He uses casual, relaxed language. It's kind of interesting to indicate that this may be a useful topic. There are a lot of great phrases for raising points of interest. Let's go over a few more.
I couldn't help noticing that you're using glass instead of plastic.
One of the things that stood out to me today was the steep slope that you're working on.
Well, as you said, it's cold out there, below freezing, and we're really interested in what kind of seal you're getting from your current glue.
This may be a topic worth pursuing further.
Of course, the answer to the question, is groundwater an issue in the tunnel, is obvious.
Yes, indeed.
Matt is using the time-honored sales strategy of trying to get your customer to say yes as much as possible. Next, he needs to ask for specifics.
And I just wanted to get a clearer picture because I know that high-pressure water can be a big safety issue, not to mention the delays.
Absolutely. Safety aspect is a priority, and obviously we'd like to minimize delays.
Matt continues to say things that he's sure the customer will agree with. At the same time, he is confirming his suspicions, his ideas, about what kind of challenges Stanley and Bill are facing in building the tunnel. I just wanted to get a clearer picture is an excellent idiom for asking for specifics. What other types of phrases are useful in this situation? At this point, Matt and Paula know that they have targeted a major area of concern for the customer. Voicing, or putting that concern into words, will confirm to the customer that they have evaluated his needs correctly.
So, it's fair to say that accurate detection of groundwater is a big concern.
It certainly is.
Again, Matt is using the soft sell. Even though he's pretty sure his product is a perfect match, he uses relaxed, casual language. It's fair to say the softness of Matt's language makes it even easier for Bill and Stanley to agree with him. The more the customer agrees, the closer Matt and Paula are to a sale. What other kinds of phrases can we use to voice customer priorities?
So it sounds like this is a pretty major area of concern to you.
Would I be too far off the mark if I said this was an area where you would like to see some better results?
So I'd guess from what I've seen so far that this issue is quite important.
In the next part of the dialogue, Paula jumps in to discuss the benefits of their product.
Well, that's just what the vision sensor is designed for.
Yeah, we know. It's one of the main reasons we asked you down.
When you're sure you've narrowed down a field of matching interests between your customer's needs and your product, it's time to start talking about benefits. There are a number of phrases that we can use to say our product is a good match.
Well, I think our system really addresses a lot of these concerns.
That is precisely the sort of application that this unit is designed for.
I'm really confident that we can help you out with this.
This sounds like a really good match to me.
But you still have to demonstrate your product's advantages over the competitor's products. This is often called your value proposition, the ways in which your product adds value, how it differentiates itself from the competition. Let's listen to Matt and Paula do this.
And compared with traditional surveying methods, our unit has a few major advantages. The sensor is wireless, so you don't have cables running around everywhere.
Definitely a plus.
Matt and Paula's product is for surveying, or scientifically examining the tunnel. It can see through rock to test for water or other problems. Traditional tunnel surveying equipment of this kind requires the use of many cables, both electrical and data lines. In a dark tunnel environment with machinery everywhere, this can be messy and difficult to deal with. Matt and Paula's system, however, is wireless. As Bill says, this is a plus or an advantage. To make a value proposition for his product, Matt says, over traditional surveying methods, our unit has a few major advantages. What are some other ways to talk about your product's advantages compared to the competition?
There are a few areas where we really have a leg up on the competition.
Compared to the competitor's product, we excel in 3 key areas.
In important ways, we have the best product on the market.
We're confident that we can deliver the best value for money out there.
The idiom, to have a leg up on, means to have an advantage over something or someone. Moving on in the dialogue, Paula makes a direct comparison with conventional or traditional systems.
Yeah, and this equipment is also much easier to operate than conventional systems.
Let's briefly study some more sentence structures for making comparisons.
You'll find that our Duraplex is stronger, safer, and has better optical quality than traditional safety glass.
I'd bet my life that you get a much stronger bond using our product in these weather conditions.
Not only that, but you'll find it's much more inexpensive. We're talking about really significant savings.
In the remainder of the dialogue, Paula and Matt continue to expand on their product's value proposition by listing its advantages in detail. Matt says that you don't have to mess around with, that is, deal with, dynamite or heavy seismograph equipment. Dynamite is a kind of high explosive, and a seismograph is a device for measuring vibrations underground. Paula goes on to explain that using their system will hardly affect work. Traditional systems require a long time to set up and take down, but it only takes 30 minutes to conduct a survey with their sensors. Bill, the railroad company manager, is very interested.
So what would it take to run a test survey?
Well, actually, we brought all the equipment with us. All we need is a drill and some accelerometers.
Bill wants to run a test survey. He'd like to see Matt and Paula's product in action. This is, of course, just what they were hoping for. They have brought a demonstration system with them. All they need are some accelerometers, which are instruments for measuring the acceleration, rate of change, of an object. It sounds like Matt and Paula are getting close to a sale, doesn't it? Now, let's practice some language we learned today. First, we'll review raising a point of interest, since that is a key step in the sales process. Imagine you're discussing possible cooperation with a customer over dinner. You'll hear a series of cues followed by a beep. Each cue consists of a possible point of interest your customer may have in your product. After each beep, use the language we studied today to make a sentence raising this point of interest. For example, if you hear using steel instead of plastic, you can say, "I couldn't help noticing that you're using steel instead of plastic." Other phrases you can use include, "One of the things that stood out to me is," and "We're really interested in." Let's begin.
The depth of the water.
The wide temperature range.
Safety awareness.
Now, listen to some example answers.
The depth of the water.
Answer. We're really interested in the depth of the water.
The wide temperature range.
Answer. One of the things that stood out to me was the wide temperature range.
Safety awareness.
Answer. Safety awareness may be a topic worth pursuing further.
For the second practice, let's review some key phrases that we covered today. You'll hear a series of sentences. One word is blanked out with a beep. Repeat the sentence, but say the missing word. For example, if you hear, "Can you see where I'm," you'll say, "Can you see where I'm pointing?" This is a great way to revise key vocabulary. Let's give it a try.
Well, let's get straight to the... Answer. Well, let's get straight to the point.
Is it all right if I turn the around? Answer. Is it all right if I turn the question around?
I'd like to get a better idea of what you're with. Answer. I'd like to get a better idea of what you're dealing with.
So it sounds like this is a pretty major area of for you. Answer. So it sounds like this is a pretty major area of concern for you.
Well, I think our system really... A lot of these concerns. Answer. Well, I think our system really addresses a lot of these concerns.
There are a few key areas where we really have a up on the competition. Answer. There are a few key areas where we really have a leg up on the competition.
That concludes this episode on product presentations. We covered useful language for both the host and the guest during an informal sales discussion. And we reviewed some important sales strategies, such as identifying priorities and getting your customer to say yes with a soft sell. In the study notes for this and other episodes, you'll find a complete transcript, exercises, and vocabulary explanations. Also, the Online Learning Center contains extensive language and listening review exercises. That's all at www.businessenglishpod.com. If you haven't already, don't forget to sign up for a trial of our learning resources. Thanks for listening. Want to get more out of Business English Pod? Then go to www.businessenglishpod.com and sign up as a premium member. Premium members can access detailed study notes and the new Phrasecast to practice all the useful language we featured today. You're listening to Business English Pod, the business English podcast for professionals on the move.
Hello, my name's Edwin Oldfield. For today's lesson, we're going to focus on the classic sales approach to selling products and services. This approach is based on explaining the features, attributes, and benefits of your products using the FAB technique. The FAB technique is useful for people working in the manufacturing and retail trade, anyone who has to present products. In particular, we'll look at how this approach can be applied in the merchandising business. Merchandising is the trade name for businesses involved in the design and manufacture of clothing and household items. If you'd like to check out the online activities for this and other lessons, why not sign up for a free trial? Just head over to the website at www.businessenglishpod.com. In the dialogue, we rejoin Marco and Francesca on their trip to a fashion trade show in the U.S. Their company, Viva, has just created an exciting new line of clothes. With the help of their American partner, Foxtrot, they are hoping to get a couple of big sales contracts with U.S. department stores. The listening takes place in the Foxtrot showroom. We'll hear Francesca speak to a potential customer, Bill, who is a buyer for Bancroft's, a retail chain store that targets professional women. As you listen, try to answer the following questions. The answers will be posted in a few days on our website. 1. What is the key feature of Viva's fall colors this year? Can you name some of the colors? 2. Why is the Viva Professional line more expensive? 3. As described in the dialogue, what are the main benefits of Viva's clothing line?
Francesca, this is Bill Tyler from Bancroft's.
Hi, Bill. It's great to finally get a chance to meet you. Here's my card.
Thanks. The pleasure's all mine.
So, Bill, let me show you our fall line. Here's the catalog. And we've got samples of everything over here on the rack.
I really love the colors.
Yes, our colors are much warmer this year. We think we're setting a trend there. Lots of ginger, apple red, ivory, and this one we call French roast.
Very nice.
And look at the embroidery on these blouses. Aren't they lovely?
Uh-huh. Very current.
Exactly. With this line, we're aiming for something that is both classy and fashionable, yet practical and very wearable at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
All of our customers will tell you that easy to wear is a hallmark of Viva.
Looks like you did a good job.
Thanks. We've got marvelous designers.
The price points on these skirts are rather high, aren't they?
That's part of our Viva Professional special edition. A little more upmarket, but you can't beat the value for money.
Well, what materials are you using?
On the professional line, it's washable wool. We use an Australian supplier. Very high-tech. Durable and easy to care for, too.
Uh-huh.
This definitely fits the lifestyle of the Bancroft woman, don't you think?
Well, I must say, I'm very impressed.
Here, let me show you more. Look at the range of outfits you can put together. Take these slacks here. They go brilliantly with just about any of the tops in our line.
Francesca does a good job of selling Viva's products to Bill. To persuade Bill to buy, she describes the features, advantages, and benefits of Viva's fall line. Let's look at the language she uses in detail. What happens at the beginning of the dialogue? Adriana, Francesca's American partner, introduces Bill. Then Francesca begins her product presentation by showing Bill Viva's fall catalog.
So, Bill, let me show you our fall line. Here's the catalog. And we've got samples of everything over here on the rack.
The first thing Francesca does is to introduce the product, in this case, a line of clothes. Clothing manufacturers typically have a different line or selection of clothes for each season: spring, summer, fall, and winter. Other products also come in lines: which just describes specific parts of your product range. For descriptions of the vocabulary words catalog, samples, and rack, please check out the study notes for this episode. To start talking about her product, Francesca says, "So, Bill, let me show you. What are some other useful phrases for introducing your product?"
Have a look at this.
I'd like to show you the new addition to our product line.
We're really excited about this one. Here, take a look.
I think you're going to love this.
At first glance, what is it that Bill likes about Viva's fall line?
I really love the colors.
Yes, our colors are much warmer this year. We think we're setting a trend there. Lots of ginger, apple red, ivory, and this one we call French roast.
Very nice.
Francesca is describing features of her product. This usually refers to physical characteristics. For clothing, colors are important features. In Francesca's case, she believes Viva's colors are going to set a trend. That is, establish a fashion. In retailing, especially with clothes, colors are often described by comparing them to things like ginger, a type of spice, apple red, or ivory, the color of elephant tusks. What are some other useful color terms? Let's listen to some more examples of people describing colors.
We have a variety of red shades ranging from a brilliant scarlet and a deep ruby to a vivid crimson and a lighter ginger.
Ranking from darker to lighter, our greens include olive, jade, emerald, and lime.
There are many shades of blue in our line, including cobalt, navy, ice, and periwinkle.
We have a variety of off-whites ranging from these straw and butter colors to this one we call sandy, and the next one, lemon, which is almost yellow.
Different kinds of black include ebony, ink, and jet.
Basically, you should practice recognizing synonyms of the main colors such as red, blue, and green. After you finish listening, refer to the study notes for a full list of color terms in today's show. You can look each one up on the internet to see an example of the actual color. What happens next? Francesca moves from talking about features to describing advantages.
And look at the embroidery on these blouses. Aren't they lovely?
Uh-huh. Very current.
Exactly. With this line, we're aiming for something that is both classy and fashionable, yet practical and very wearable at the same time.
Embroidery means patterns, such as flowers made with thread on cloth. A blouse is a woman's shirt. Here, Francesca is still talking about features, the decorations on the cloth. But in the next line, she talks about the style of the line. It is classy, sophisticated, and smart, fashionable, yet practical, and wearable, all at the same time. As Francesca says, easy to wear is a hallmark or distinguishing characteristic of Viva. With Francesca's discussion of styles, she is now moving into advantages. Advantages answers what strong points to the features of the product create for customers. For example, hard is a feature, but durable or hard to break is an advantage. Styles provide advantages to customers who want to present themselves in a certain way. Style is an important part of selling many types of products. What are some other ways to describe styles?
This is a modern version of 1920s Bohemian.
Our dresses are simple yet feminine.
We're aiming for a design that is simultaneously romantic and urban.
This is a very natural and casual look, yet sophisticated as well.
For descriptions of unfamiliar vocabulary, please check out the study notes. Next in the dialogue, Bill asks a specific question about part of the line.
The price points on these skirts are rather high, aren't they?
That's part of our Viva Professional special edition. A little more upmarket, but you can't beat the value for money.
Well, what materials are you using?
On the professional line, it's washable wool. We use an Australian supplier. Very high tech. Durable and easy to care for, too.
Bill is curious about a particular part of the line, the Viva Professional Special Edition, because the price points are higher. That is, it is more expensive. Francesca explains that Viva Professional is more upmarket. That is, it targets people with more money. The material is a special washable wool, which refers to wool that you can clean in a washing machine. The fabric is durable and easy to care for. Durable, washable, and so on are also advantages. Can you think of more? Let's listen to some examples.
This model features a robust construction.
One of the great advantages of this product is its portability.
It's got really eye-catching packaging.
The product employs sophisticated technology.
I think you'll find it's very user-friendly.
Again, refer to the study notes for a full list of vocabulary, including definitions and examples. Finally, how does the dialogue end?
This definitely fits the lifestyle of the Bancroft woman, don't you think?
Well, I must say, I'm very impressed.
Here, let me show you more. Look at the range of outfits you can put together.
What is happening in this part of the dialogue? In retailing these days, we are concerned with creating and appealing to a lifestyle. The Bancroft stores appeal to women who are professional and busy, women who are always on the go. This is their target market. Francesca talks about how the advantages of Viva clothing, wearable, washable, durable, fashionable, versatile, would provide benefits to Bancroft shoppers. So benefits are advantages to a specific customer or group of customers. Unlike features, benefits can change depending on who is buying the product. Using fab to sell means skillfully portraying the advantages of our products and their features and describing how these advantages provide a benefit to a specific customer. When customers see benefits to them, they will buy. Let's practice that. Listen to some sample sentences explaining the benefit of products.
The portability of our system gives you unsurpassed flexibility.
The eye-catching packaging enables you to sell more products faster.
Its robust construction ensures that this machine will stand up to the toughest environments.
The high-tech design of this computer allows it to work underwater.
The unit is very compact, which makes it easy to transport.
As you can see, gives you, ensures you can, enables you to, allows it to, and makes it are several ways to explain how advantages are linked to benefits. Now it's your turn to practice. Imagine you are describing a new product that your company has just produced. It's a high-tech new kind of cell phone. You're trying to sell the phone to a customer who will need to use it in remote areas at construction sites. You'll hear a series of cues which consist of an advantage and a benefit. Link the advantage to the benefit using some of the language we have studied, such as helps you to, ensures you can. Are you ready? Let's give it a try.
Durability. Withstand a large range of temperatures. Sophisticated technology. Connect to the internet anywhere in the world. Compact design. easy to carry with you anywhere.
Now, listen to some answers.
Durability. Withstand a large range of temperatures.
Answer. Its durability enables it to withstand a large range of temperatures.
Sophisticated technology. Connect to the internet anywhere in the world.
Answer. Its sophisticated technology ensures you can connect to the internet anywhere in the world.
Compact design. Easy to carry with you anywhere. Answer.
Its compact design makes it easy to carry with you anywhere.
Before we finish, let's review the key useful language for describing benefits. You'll hear a series of sentences. In each phrase, one word is missing, replaced with a beep. Repeat the whole sentence, saying the missing word.
The unit is very compact, which it easy to transport. Answer. The unit is very compact, which makes it easy to transport.
The eye-catching packaging you to sell more products faster. Answer. The eye-catching packaging enables you to sell more products faster.
The portability of our system. You unsurpassed flexibility. Answer. The portability of our system gives you unsurpassed flexibility.
That's all for this episode on classic product presentations. We've seen how describing our products in terms of features, advantages, and benefits to the customer can help us sell. And we've studied vocabulary for describing colors, styles, and advantages of various kinds, as well as language for explaining benefits. Remember to review the study notes. There, you'll find language review exercises, a complete transcript, and vocabulary explanations for this and other lessons. To find more ways to improve your English, visit our online learning center at www.businessenglishpod.com. Thanks for listening.
Want to get more out of Business English Pod? Then go to www.businessenglishpod.com and sign up as a premium member. Premium members can access detailed study notes and the new phrasecast to practice all the useful language we featured today. Presenting for Success, Unit 1, Making Your Introduction. Today we look at some of the language used during internal presentations. To start off this episode, I've asked some of my colleagues what tips they might have for making a good introduction. Following that, we have the main dialogue and then the debrief. So here's me putting my colleagues right on the spot. Okay, we're talking about presentations and in particular introductions to presentations. Jeff, do you have any guidelines you use when you're writing, preparing, or actually doing an introduction? Is there something that you always keep in mind and say, well, this is what I always do and must do?
Well, in English we talk about something called an elevator pitch, which is like a summary of a proposal or an idea that takes maybe no more than 10 or 15 seconds to explain. The idea is that it should be short enough that you can actually give it to somebody in an elevator, just in that very brief period of time that you have their attention. Now, I think when you're beginning a presentation, in some ways you're in the same situation. You may be planning to give a very long speech. It could last 30 or 45 minutes.
Yeah.
But you've only got that first minute or so to convince people that they ought to be listening to what you're going to say. So you've got to give them some good reasons to listen to everything else that's coming up. Give them an idea of what you're going to say and why they should be listening.
Do you have a formula, Peter? I do. If you don't,
Well,
this is the one I
please
use.
tell me.
What's the formula?
Let me get my pen.
Well, I got this formula from a certain school a long time ago, and it's pretty good. It has all the elements I think should be in every presentation, whether it's formal or informal.
Okay, well, tell us.
Your name. Well, first of all, a greeting. You know, you have to say hi.
I think you should always start with thank you.
Or welcome. Or welcome.
I think thank you.
Or hello.
Thank you and welcome.
Well, why don't we put them on? Hello, thank you, and welcome to whatchamacallit.
You can put them all together.
Okay, put them all together, one package. And then a name. I think it's kind of rude not to tell people exactly who you are and your title, what your job is, or why you are qualified to speak on the subject.
And that's a good point. You know, a lot of internal presentations these days are done over either telephone conference or video conference. And you've got people from different international locations. They might have heard your name, but they might not know your face. And so when you get up to speak, even within your company and even maybe your division or your department, it is, as you say, good manners, but also it's important.
You know, I think a lot of the listeners on these podcasts, they themselves are very accomplished speakers in their own language. And so I'm sure they know how to make a speech or a presentation. And hopefully, though, this podcast will give these speakers and others the ideas of how the types of language we use in presentations and in particular introductions on this particular podcast. Okay, everybody, let's all take a seat and get things started. We have a long day ahead of us and we need to keep to the schedule. So let's see how our video conference line is working. Hello, Sydney and New York. Can both of you hear us and see us okay?
Yes, Perry, we have our whole sales group here. Everything's working okay, and we're ready when you are.
Loud and clear here in New York too, Perry.
Okay then. Leading off this morning is Claude Daughtry from Consumer Products Division, and he'll be presenting some of the latest sales figures and trends for our product lines in this very key sector. Claude, if you're ready, please take it away.
Thank you, Barry. And good morning, everybody. A warm welcome from our Paris office, whether you're here in person or here via video from Sydney or New York. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Claude Daughtry, Senior Sales Analyst from our Consumer Products Division, and I'll be presenting our analysis of recent sales data. We will then examine some important trends and conclusions we can make about the growth of our product lines. After that, we plan to look at some forecasts and propose sales strategies to adjust to the trends we see developing. During this kickoff meeting, we hope to arrive at some recommendations to forward to senior management before their next shareholder meeting. And finally, we'll open it up to any questions you might have about sales in general, whether it concerns the EU, the Americas, or the Asia-Pacific region. I estimate my prepared remarks will cover about 30 minutes, and the next 30 minutes will be dedicated to answering your questions. Hopefully, you've all received the handout material I sent, but I'll also be showing the charts in PowerPoint, in case you don't have your handouts with you. So, let's take a look at our first topic, yes, you have a question?
Yes, sorry to interrupt. I was wondering if you plan to talk about global marketing efforts and how they tie into regional sales promotions.
Building up a spirit of teamwork in an internal meeting is very important, especially during the introduction stage of a presentation. Personality plays a part, but some simple language patterns do help. Use pronouns such as we, all, us, our, ours, and everybody as much as possible. For example, when starting a meeting, we can say,
Well, why don't we all get started?
Let's all take our seats if we could.
Is everybody ready to start?
Okay, let's kick this meeting off.
The introduction phase sets the tone and expectations of a meeting or presentation. Although very often the presenter will introduce him or herself to the audience, sometimes another person may introduce the speaker, as in our example, where the presenter was introduced by the chairperson of the teleconference. A complete introduction for a presentation includes the following parts: a greeting, a name and position, the title and subject, the objective or goal of the presentation, the main parts of the talk, a mention of the visual aids that will be used, the time it will take, when questions should be asked, a reference to the audience, and a link to the first section of the presentation. Not all presentation introductions will have every one of these elements, and not all will follow this sequence. However, most proper introductions will use a majority of these elements in some form and in this general sequence. Let's start with some greetings.
Good morning, everybody.
Good afternoon and welcome to the North American Division.
Welcome, all of you, to the Smith Center.
I thank you all for coming this evening to our first employee benefits review.
The name and position of the presenter usually follows. If the presenter is well known amongst the audience, he may not even mention his own name. If most of the people know the presenter, then they may precede their self-introduction with, "For those of you who don't know me." However, when presenting in front of large or widely separated departments, it is customary to introduce yourself with not only your own full name, but your title and area of responsibility. This tells audience members who you are, what your position is, and what sort of knowledge or duties you have concerning the presentation subject. Let's try some names and titles.
My name is, and I'm the HR manager for our UK operation.
I'm a test engineer for the QC department.
My name is Alison Wright and I'm the HR manager for our UK operation.
I'm Chuck Yeager, and I'm a test engineer with quality control.
When introducing one's duties or areas of knowledge, we usually use the words, "I am responsible for," or "I am in charge of." Let's try some of these.
I'm responsible for new employee training.
I'm in charge of test data collection.
I'm responsible for designing new electrical switches.
I manage regional sales promotions in South America.
Try combining the above phrases into complete introductory statements that include name, title, and area of responsibility. For example, taking the first phrase of each part, we could say,
Good morning, everybody. My name is Alison Wright. I'm the HR manager for our London division, and I'm responsible for new employee training.
After the beep, introduce yourself and state your responsibilities at your company. Then, listen to an example answer to compare. Of course, the details of everyone's answer will be a little different.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Alison Wright. I'm the HR manager for our London division, and I'm responsible for new employee training.
After the presenter introduces himself and his position, the subject of the presentation is then usually stated, along with the purpose of the presentation. A well-designed presentation will then include a guide to the rest of the talk. The presenter will tell the audience what is to come and what parts of the presentation will be presented in which order. This is called signposting, like the signs on street corners that tell a traveler where he is and where he's going. Signposting helps to focus the audience's attention. We'll cover signposting in the next podcast. Welcome to Business English Pod, a great way to improve your English skills on the go. Internal presentations, signposting. Today we're looking at signposting during presentations. Signposting is informing listeners about what is to be presented in a presentation, and then constantly informing listeners as to where they are during that presentation.
And that about wraps it up for the detailed sales figures. Now, let's see what we can conclude from the sales data. I've divided this section of the presentation into 3 parts. First, we're going to review historical sales in this market segment. Next, we'll discuss developing sales trends. And finally, we'll compare our performance with our chief competitors. So, let's talk about some of the history of our particular market niche. Our whole industry came of age in... Okay, that covers the history of sales in the marketplace. Now, let's move on to some of the trends in recent sales that we've observed. First, I'll give a detailed analysis of industry sales trends by region. Then, we're going to examine our own sales in these same regions. And we'll finish this section by going over our sales trends for new products. Everybody with me? Well then, let's turn our attention to this first chart, which shows overall sales trends worldwide.
Any presentation requires a clear strategy or plan to help you reach your objectives. The aim is not to pass away 20 minutes talking nonstop and showing a lot of nice pictures. It is to deliver a message that is worth hearing to an audience that wants to hear it. However, how many speakers really hold an audience's attention? What's the secret for those who do? First, find out about the audience and what they need to know. Plan what you're going to say and say it clearly and concisely. And make sure to signpost throughout the presentation. What is signposting? The term signposting comes from signs posted on street corners, which tell travelers where they are and where they're going. In presentations, signposting is informing the listener as to what things are going to be talked about and when sections have been completed and new sections are opened. This helps to focus the audience's attention. Once the audience knows what subjects and sections are to come, they can listen to the information from the right perspective and know how to file this information away in the proper places in their minds. One does not want the audience wondering what subjects you are talking about or how the information currently being presented fits into the larger theme of the presentation. Make it simple for the listener. Lead the listener through the presentation with signposting. How does one signpost? A good speaker uses various signposting signals to help hold the audience's attention and make the parts of the presentation very clear. He does this as he introduces the subjects and as he moves through them. One type of signal is to introduce a list. This could begin with a phrase like,
I've divided this section of the presentation into 3 parts.
The speaker then says what the 3 things are and talks about each one at the required level of detail. For example,
there are 3 types of price that we have to think about: economic price, market price, and psychological price. Let's look at each of these in more detail. First, economic price. This is based on production costs and the need to make a profit.
And then the speaker goes on to describe this type of price in more detail. After that, he goes on to talk about the market price and so on. Another signaling technique is to give a link between parts of the presentation. Tell the listeners where one part of the talk finishes and another part starts. For example, a well-organized presentation usually contains different parts and a progression from one part to the next part with clear phrases like,
"That's all I want to say about the development of the product." Now, let's turn to the actual marketing plan. Let's now take a look at sales results.
This technique is very helpful to the audience, including those who are mainly interested in one part only. Another type of signaling is sequencing of information. This usually follows a logical order, usually based on time. So a project may be described in terms of the past, the present, and the future. Keywords and sequencing information are
first, then, next, after that, later, at the end, finally,
etc. Still another technique, which helps to emphasize key points, is careful repetition of what has been talked about. Examples are,
as I've already said, there is no alternative but to increase production by 100%.
Or,
I'd like to re-emphasize the main benefit of the new design. It achieves twice as much power with half as much fuel.
Here are some other examples of emphasizing points which have already been talked about.
As we saw in Part 2, as we covered during our discussion of weight savings, recalling our look at sales projections for the next decade.
And here are some useful signposting phrases that should be used to guide listeners. To move on, which means to go to the next subject.
Let's move on to the situation in our overseas markets.
To expand on, which means give more information on.
Could you expand on the issue of pricing?
To digress, which means to change to another subject.
If I could digress for just a moment, what about our plans for the new office?
To go back, which means to go to a point earlier in the presentation.
Let's go back to the first item on the agenda.
To recap, which is to repeat a previous part of the presentation.
So, to recap, our sales in the third quarter have been strong in all regions.
To conclude, which is to bring to an end.
I'd like to conclude by discussing the future of our company.
To summarize, which means give the main points.
Next, Peter is going to summarize our marketing strategy.
To turn to, which means to move on.
I'd like to turn to the question of hiring new staff.
To elaborate on, which means to give detailed information on.
The next presentation will elaborate on our sales plans for next year.
Although many phrases can be used to indicate the end of a section and the beginning of another, there is one single word that can be used in almost all cases to signal ends and beginnings. This word is so, most often followed by a pause. We encourage our podcast listeners to use other phrases to make your presentations more interesting. But when one cannot think of a signposting phrase quick enough, the word so is a very handy replacement. Listen and practice these examples and pay special attention to the pauses.
So, what can we conclude from this data? So, let's move on to our market for air conditioners. So, let's take a look at this chart. So, what can we expect for the future? So, what can the past teach us?
A final point concerns signposting and structuring of information. Psychologists have suggested that concentration is reduced after about 20 minutes without a break or a change in activity. Furthermore, audiences should not be overburdened with technical details or given too many facts to remember. It is claimed that to ask people to remember more than 3 things in a 5-minute talk is way too much. Some say that 7 things is the maximum number of things anybody can remember in any presentation. Any such calculations are probably not very reliable, but every speaker needs to think about exactly how much information of a particular type a specific audience is likely to absorb and to plan accordingly. And in keeping with our own advice, we are going to conclude this podcast well inside of 20 minutes, just to make sure you remember all of what we just covered. And our final signpost is, thanks for listening. Thank you for listening to Business English Pod. We'll be back next week with a new podcast. You're listening to Business English Pod, the Business English podcast for professionals on the move. This is the first of 3 episodes on charts and trends. Over these 3 shows, we'll be learning language for dealing with visuals, describing trends, analyzing and comparing data, and making predictions. Visuals refers to any visual element of your presentation, charts, graphs, pictures, and so on. A trend is the general direction, upward or downward, of some metric, that is, measurement, such as price or revenue. For example, when we say the price of oil has risen 30% in the last 3 months, that's a trend.
Clayton, just before we get going, can you tell us why dealing with charts and trends is so important for presentations?
Well, every presentation contains a visual element, whether it's a few words written with a marker on the board or a high-tech PowerPoint presentation with movies and animations. As the old saying goes, a picture is worth 1,000 words. So pictures, charts, and graphs, they can do the talking for you. But you need to be able to highlight the main points clearly, effectively, and logically. That way, your carefully prepared visuals are going to have the maximum impact on your audience. Now, in today's episode, we're focusing on the basics of how to deal with visuals in your presentation. That is, how to attract attention to them, how to emphasize the key parts, and how to relate points about different visuals as you move through your slides. A slide is just one picture in your PowerPoint presentation, for example. By the way, you'll see that a lot of the language we cover continues on our discussion of signposting during the last episode.
Great. Now tell us about the listening today.
Okay. The listening comes from a presentation at the Central European head office of Ambient, an American mobile phone manufacturer. Ambient has regained market share after a couple of bad years and is now taking over the number 2 place behind market leader Cirrus and just ahead of the 3rd player, Calltel. You'll hear Pat, the new finance director in the Central Europe region, in the middle of a presentation to the sales team. As we join them, he's bringing up a slide on revenue trends among the top 3 players in the business. As you listen, pay attention to the language that Pat uses to call attention to his points and to relate them to each other.
Everybody ready? Okay. I'll lead into our discussion today with a quick look at sales over the last 5 quarters. I'm going to bring up our competitors one by one so we can have a look at how they've been doing in contrast to our own performance. Okay. Well, first there's Calltel. As I'm sure you all know, they've been making a play for the low-end market since they sold off their network division. We can see the boost in sales they reaped in Q4 of 2006 when they brought out their new budget price points. But that's only part of the story, as we'll see a little later. Next, we have everyone's favorite, Cirrus. Okay. No love lost there. But let me just draw your attention to the plateau in sales they're facing at the moment with their disastrous 3G rollout. As you can see, it's really put their revenue under pressure in the last 2 quarters. And that brings us to Ambient.
Yeah. All right. Bye.
As I said at the beginning, it's been a great couple of quarters, and I'm sure you'll be pleased to hear Central Europe now accounts for over 25% of our European sales. That's a 34% year-on-year increase. Fantastic. But we're actually projecting a fairly flat second half as we focus on the higher value product lines, something we'll look at in more detail later.
Pat has clearly signposted all of his points and used some very effective language for highlighting key trends. Let's take a closer look at how he does that. Listen again to the beginning.
I'm going to bring up our competitors one by one so we can have a look at how they've been doing in contrast to our own performance.
This is Pat's introduction to his slide. He is giving us the background on what he plans to say so that we can follow him and keep everything in context. He says, I'll lead into our discussion today with, from this, we can tell this is the first, or lead, slide in his discussion. Now, let's look at some of the vocabulary. A quarter refers to a period of 3 months. There are 4 quarters in a year. You can also refer to them by number: Q1, Q2, Q3, and Q4. When Pat says he's going to bring up their competitors one by one, he doesn't just mean mention them. He means he's going to show us a graph where each competitor's revenue figures are brought up onto the picture one at a time, building up until we have 3 trend lines to compare. You can refer to the study notes for this episode to see the actual graph Pat is using. This is called a bar graph because it is composed of a series of bars, or thick vertical lines that look like chocolate bars standing on end. Okay, let's practice some more language we can use to introduce a point.
We'll kick off the discussion today with an analysis of our revenue figures over the last 3 years.
First, we'll be focusing on return on investment in the real estate area.
I'd like to begin by going over some of the key concerns that the marketing department has voiced on this plan.
Let's start off with a quick look at our sales.
Now, what does Pat do next? He calls attention to the first trend he brings up on his graph. Okay, well first, here's call tell. What is some other language he could use to call attention to a visual?
Have a look at this. As you can see,
take a look at this.
Well, first, here are our total profits in 2006.
All right, what happens next? Remember, Pat is talking about one of Ambiant's competitors, Calltel.
as I'm sure you all know, they've been making a play for the low-end market since they sold off their network division.
As we'll see again and again, competition between companies is often described in terms of war or sports metaphors. To make a play for is an idiom that means to try to acquire or to control. Pat's sentence literally means that Calltel is trying to improve their sales in the low end, that is, low price market. Now here's an important point. Remember that Pat is what we call the new kid on the block. That means he has not been working for Ambiant very long, whereas many people in his audience will have been with the company for years. At this stage in his presentation, Pat is making some fairly simple points because they provide important background for his later analysis. But everyone already knows what he's talking about. So, especially as a newcomer to Ambiant, it's important for him to show respect for his audience. As I'm sure you all know, is a great way to do this. Let's learn some other ways to respect your audience's knowledge.
As you are all aware, we are facing some difficult choices over the next 6 months.
The past year has obviously seen some tough challenges from our competitors.
Most of you are familiar with our productivity figures, but for the benefit of those who aren't, let me briefly bring them up on screen.
All right, now let's take a look at how Pat highlights a key point. He's still talking about Calltel.
We can see the boost in sales they reaped in Q4 of 2006 when they brought out their new budget price points.
Budget price points refers to inexpensive, low-end products, in this case, mobile phones. We can see is a way of drawing attention to the point you want to make. Pat probably has a laser pointer, and he's pointing at the part of the graph he wants everyone to focus on. Later, he highlights another point by saying, "Let me just draw your attention to..." What other kinds of phrases can he use to do this?
One thing you'll immediately notice is a marked increase in Q4.
I'd particularly like to draw your attention to the sharp fall in investments here in Q2 of 2007.
I'd also like to point out the strong growth in the luxury sector.
And perhaps I should mention the slight drop in customer satisfaction reported in Western Europe.
Since highlighting is such an important part of getting your message across, why don't we practice this skill? Are you ready? It's your turn to give it a try. In a moment, you'll hear a series of points, such as fallen sales Q1. After each point, you'll hear a beep. That means it's your turn to start talking. Use the phrases we just practiced to draw attention to each point. For example, if you hear fallen sales Q1, you can say something like, "One thing you'll immediately notice is that sales fell dramatically in Q1. Are you ready? Let's begin.
Sharp increase in revenue 2006.
Strong profit performance Q1 2007.
How did that go? Listen to some example answers.
I'd particularly like to draw your attention to the sharp increase in revenue in 2006.
One thing you'll immediately notice is the strong profit performance in Q1 of 2007.
After telling us that Calltel has improved revenue by selling more low-end phones, Pat does something very interesting. He foreshadows a point to come. Foreshadow means anticipate or give a hint about something.
But that's only part of the story, as we'll see a little later.
Pat is essentially giving us a hint about a key point he's going to make later in his presentation, which we will see in the third episode of this series. Foreshadowing is a great way of keeping the audience interested, and also of relating the structure of your presentation internally, so that audience members will be able to think back clearly to a point that you made earlier when it becomes important for your analysis later. Are there any other examples of foreshadowing in today's listening? Yes, this is something Pat does again at the end when he says, "But we're actually projecting a fairly flat second half as we focus on the higher value product lines," something we'll look at in more detail later. By the way, project means to predict, and flat refers to little growth, a flat trend line. All right, how else can you foreshadow a point?
And that indicates reasonable growth in this sector, which we'll come back to in a moment.
As I'll point out later, we've only seen limited success with this strategy. For now, let's keep talking about marketing channels.
This is a key issue which we'll be dealing with a little later in the presentation when I go over departmental structure.
What happens next? Pat brings up the trend for the second competitor onto the chart. Let's listen.
Next, we have everyone's favorite Cirrus. Okay. No love lost there. But let me just draw your attention to the plateau in sales they're facing at the moment with their disastrous 3G rollout.
It doesn't sound like Cirrus is very popular, does it? As the idiom goes, it's the company that everyone loves to hate. That's what Pat means by, there's no love lost there, which is another great idiom to add to your vocabulary. As we looked at earlier when we reviewed highlighting, Pat says, let me just draw your attention to, in order to draw attention to the following point. That is, after the disastrous rollout or launch of their 3G technology, which means third generation advanced cell phone technology, Cirrus is facing a plateau in sales. A plateau is simply a mountain with a flat top. So to face a plateau means to remain level, no movement, a flat trend line. This kind of language for actually describing trends we'll be looking at in greater detail in the next episode in this series, Charts and Trends 2. Now, before Pat is able to highlight this point about Cirrus, he has to signpost that he's moving on to another part of his slide. He says, next, we have everyone's favorite, Cirrus. Then he puts the trend line for Cirrus on the screen so his audience can compare it to call tells. And then again, after he finishes talking about Cirrus, Pat has to signpost the last point as he brings ambiance figures up onto the screen. He says, and that brings us to ambient. What is some more language we can use to signpost the next graphic or next slide? Well, you can use some of the ways we learned earlier for introducing a point. In addition, here are some phrases that are specifically designed for moving between points.
That's all for sales growth. Now, let's have a look at profit margins.
And that brings us to the next point I'd like to make.
Great, that's all for 2006. Let's now turn to the figures for 2007.
That concludes the first slide. Let's bring up the next. Now here we see the current state of the market.
Okay, there's just one more point to cover in today's episode. We've practiced introducing a point, moving between points, highlighting a point, foreshadowing or anticipating a future point, and the only thing left is how to refer to a previous point. Listen to Pat talking about ambient during the last section of today's listening.
As I said at the beginning, it's been a great couple of quarters, and I'm sure you'll be pleased to hear Central Europe now accounts for over 25% of our European sales. That's a 34% year-on-year increase.
As I said at the beginning, is a way of calling back to mind a previous point, perhaps something that you foreshadowed earlier. In this case, Pat is giving more evidence to one of his main comments, which is that the Central Europe region is doing quite well. By a 34% year-on-year increase, Pat means a 34% rise compared with last year. Now, what are some more ways to refer to a previous point?
As I mentioned earlier, we really need to keep coming back to our defect rate as a key quality indicator.
Returning to what I said earlier, this is definitely an area of concern for us in the future.
To go back to what I was saying about our overall growth, I don't really think we have much reason to be worried.
And that does it for today's episode. You practice a variety of signposting language for emphasizing or highlighting important messages and relating the points of your presentation to each other. These are very important skills to have. Practicing this language will help you prove the old saying true by making each of your pictures truly worth 1,000 words. Now, just a little foreshadowing here. In the next episode, we'll be dealing in detail with describing trends. We'll be learning a variety of lively and vivid language and structures for concisely describing the main trend lines in your charts and graphs. You're listening to Business English Pod, the Business English podcast for professionals on the move. When I say using your voice to give a good presentation, what comes to mind? Perhaps the first thing you think of is speaking fluently and clearly. Another important question is how to emphasize your ideas. In this episode, we'll be studying these points: how to speak naturally and how to highlight ideas. In addition, we'll be looking at a few expressions and phrases you can use to add extra emphasis to your presentation. This listening takes place at Pharmatech, a major international pharmaceutical manufacturer based in Switzerland. In this episode, a group of European journalists are taking a tour of Pharmatech's new high-potency production center in Beijing, which is scheduled to start making Pharmatech's new blockbuster medication, Zorax, in the fall of 2007. Blockbuster means hugely successful. High-potency production refers to using highly potent or very strong chemicals. This is a manufacturing technique that requires state-of-the-art or very advanced technology. We'll be hearing Pharmatech employees introduce the new plant. We'll start with a couple of very bad examples where the voice needs a lot of work. Listen to Gunther Schmidt, the manager of Pharmatech's Corporate Affairs Division. As you listen, focus on his voice. What does he do wrong?
Here at Pharmatech, not only are we devoted to improving patients' quality lives, simultaneously, we're committed to protecting the environment. That's why the High Potency Production Center has adopted state-of-the-art green technology and advanced international production techniques.
What do you think? It sounds like Gunther had maybe too much coffee or forgotten to take out his chewing gum, doesn't it? So, what are the main problems with Gunther's speech? First of all, he doesn't clearly enunciate or pronounce his words, does he? All of us can relate to Gunther's problem. When you're speaking a foreign language, you should actually slow your speech down and do your best to speak clearly. But it's tempting to speed up and blend words together so that you can hide any problems you might have with your pronunciation. However, doing this makes your speech hard to understand.
Here at Pharmatech, not only are we devoted to improving patients' quality lives.
It's almost impossible to clearly make out, not only are we, isn't it? After little coaching, Gunther does a much better job. Let's listen to his improved version.
Here at Pharmatech, not only are we completely devoted to improving patients' quality of life.
The words are much more clearly enunciated, aren't they? Now, let's go back to Gunther's bad example again. What other problems were there with his speech?
That's why the High Potency Production Center has adopted state-of-the-art green technology and advanced international production techniques.
In addition to poor enunciation, Gunther is speaking too fast, isn't he? Contrary to popular belief, it's actually quite hard to change the speed at which you speak. The rate at which you actually produce syllables, or parts of words, is called articulation rate. For most speakers, it is fixed. That is, it doesn't change very much, even if they try. So, what does it mean when it sounds like someone is speaking too fast? Well, what it actually means is that they're making fewer pauses. Making more pauses can be very good for your speech. When you listen to a politician or to a trained speaker, you find that they pause more frequently. Also, the length of the pauses is longer than normal. This gives the impression that the speech is much slower and lends an air of strength or authority to the speaker. Let's listen to a better example, where Gunther makes more frequent and longer pauses.
That's why the High Potency Production Center has adopted state-of-the-art green technology and advanced production techniques.
In this example, Gunther speaks like he has more authority and seems more professional, doesn't he? Speaking more slowly, that is, adding more frequent and longer pauses to your speech, will add power to your presentation. Also, breaking the words down into smaller groups makes them easier to say, which will help your speech become clear and more fluent. Now, let's listen to another bad example. This time, we'll hear Tanya Witherspoon Chen, who is Corporate Communications Manager for Pharmatech China, the company's joint venture in China. She's trying to give the same speech that Gunther just did.
Here at Pharmatech, not only are we devoted to improving patients' quality of lives, simultaneously, we are committed to protecting the environment. That's why the High Potency Production Center has adopted state-of-the-art green technology and advanced international production techniques.
It's painful to listen to, isn't it? What's the problem? Well, she has enough pauses, but they're not in the right places. This sounds not fluent or choppy. Choppy means she stops in all the wrong places. Tanya needs a little coaching. She needs to divide her words into grammatically logical groups. To help herself speak more fluently, she needs to use longer and more frequent pauses. Let's listen to Tanya giving the same presentation. But this time, she's received some coaching and she does a much better job. Also, she's added a few words to give special emphasis to her talk.
Here at Pharmatech, not only are we completely devoted to improving patients' quality of life, at the same time, we are totally committed to protecting the environment. That's why the High Potency Production Center has adopted state-of-the-art green technology and advanced international production techniques. Thus, we achieve a high level of protection for the environment and for workers. Also, this serves as a model of excellence for other production lines. And above all, it embodies Pharmatech's commitment to sustainable development. So please come this way and I'll be glad to show you the production line.
This time, Tanya did a much better job, didn't she? She sounds confident, fluent, and strong. Let's take a look at how she achieves these effects. We've already talked about pausing. Tanya has arranged her words into grammatically logical groups, such as adverbial phrases, subjects, predicates, and so on. Listen again.
Here at Pharmatech, not only are we completely devoted to improving patients' quality of life, at the same time, we are totally committed to protecting the environment.
There are clear pauses after Pharmatech, devoted, lives, time, and committed. These pauses break the speech down into logical groups. Note that Tanya could have even added more pauses if she wanted to. For example, she could have said, not only are we completely devoted to improving patients' quality of lives, even with more pauses, as long as Tanya divides her speech into grammatically logical groups, she will sound fluent. To sum up, not fluent or choppy speech comes from improper pausing, not from pausing too much. Now, there's another level that we need to pay attention to when we talk about voice. That is, intonation, or the rise and fall in pitch. For example, in English, as you know, most yes-no questions have a rising intonation.
Are you free for dinner?
Have you finished the report?
On the other hand, the WH questions, where, when, who, etc., have a falling intonation.
What are you doing later?
How is the report coming along?
Going back to Tanya's speech, when do you hear rising intonation and when do you hear falling intonation?
Here at Pharmatech, not only are we completely devoted to improving patients' quality of life, at the same time, we are totally committed to protecting the environment.
The pitch goes up at the end of the first sentence after quality of lives and down at the end of the second sentence after protecting the environment. Why is that? Well, in English, basically, intonation goes down at the end of an idea. Not only A, rising intonation, but also B, falling intonation. Listen to another example.
That's why the High Potency Production Center has adopted state-of-the-art green technology and advanced international production techniques.
The intonation rises after production center and green technology and finishes at the end of her idea and of her sentence, which is after techniques. Listen to a few more sentences with rising and falling intonations.
Our products range from high-end industrial printers to low-end consumer models.
Success in business requires 4 things: hard work, vision, luck, and good relationships.
This is not a matter of cutting costs, but of increasing profit.
Good. So far, we've covered 2 major parts of making your voice smooth and fluent: pausing and intonation. Now, we're going to look at the third important element in using your voice to give a good presentation: stress and emphasis. Going back to Tanya's speech, did you notice anything different about the content compared to the bad example? To emphasize her points, she's made use of some intensifying or strengthening adverbs, such as completely or totally.
Not only are we completely devoted to improving patients' quality of life, at the same time, we are totally committed to protecting the environment.
This type of adverb is sometimes called an intensifier. Listen to some more examples of their use.
There is absolutely no room for compromise on this issue.
This is a terribly important problem to tackle.
As far as I can see, we have completely failed in implementing this marketing plan.
In the past 6 months, we have totally succeeded in meeting our targets.
We really need to reinvent our whole branding strategy.
This market is highly competitive.
One thing you might have noted from these examples is that we frequently use our voice to add extra emphasis to intensifying adverbs. That is, instead of just saying, "We are totally committed," we can say, "We are totally committed." Let's call this extra emphasis stressing a word. Using your voice to stress key words is another important strategy that good presenters use. Let's take a look at a couple more examples from Tanya's speech. Which words are emphasized?
That's why the High Potency Production Center has adopted state-of-the-art green technology and advanced international production techniques.
Did you hear the stress on state-of-the-art and advanced? These are key points, things that differentiate Pharmatech from the competitors. So, Tanya wants to give them special emphasis.
Thus, we achieve a high level of protection for the environment and for workers.
In this case, Tanya stresses the word "and" to highlight the point that protection for workers is important. It's important to be conscious of how stress can change meaning. Listen to these 2 examples.
Our sales have improved in Western Europe. Our sales have improved in Western Europe.
What's the difference in meaning between these 2 sentences? By stressing Western, the second sentence makes it sound like our sales have improved in Western Europe, but not elsewhere in Europe. Perhaps not in Central or Eastern Europe. So far today, we've already studied pausing, intonation, and stress. Now, let's finish off by looking at a couple of words and expressions that Tanya uses to add emphasis to her speech.
Also, this serves as a model of excellence for other production lines. And above all, it embodies Pharmatech's commitment to sustainable development.
Sustainable development refers to development that can be sustained or maintained over the long term. It usually has an environmental meaning. To protect the environment, it's important to pursue sustainable development of business and resources. To embody a commitment is a good collocation or word partnership that you should learn. Embody means to represent or symbolize. So, Pharmatech's high-tech grain production lines embody, that is, represent or serve as a symbol of, its commitment to long-term sustainable growth. Now, compared to the bad example we examined at the beginning, what words has Tanya added to make her ideas clearer and to give emphasis to key points? She has added, and above all, to the last sentence to give special weight to Pharmatech's commitment to sustainable development. What are some other phrases you can use to add special emphasis to your key ideas? Let's look at some examples.
In particular, improving quality is very important.
Above all, we need to think of more ways to improve sales.
Without a doubt, opening up new markets is our greatest challenge.
I'd like to emphasize our complete dedication to this project.
What's especially important is that we consider this challenge from all angles and take into account different perspectives.
Good. Now let's practice what we've just learned. Imagine you're giving a speech to introduce your new factory to some journalists. You have to make 3 key points. Your new production center uses advanced technology, protects the environment and workers, and embodies your commitment to sustainable development. In a moment, you'll hear a cue or hint reminding you of these 3 points. Then, you'll have a few seconds to think. After the beep, make a sentence that includes all 3 key ideas. Be careful to put your words into logical grammatical groups to sound smooth and fluent. Also, think about intonation. For example, the pitch should fall when you're at the end of your idea. Finally, you should try using your voice or some emphasizing words to add special stress to a key point or 2. Are you ready? Let's give it a try.
Uses advanced technology, protects the environment and workers, embodies our commitment to sustainable development.
How did that go? Listen to an example answer.
Our new production center uses advanced technology, completely protects the environment and workers, and above all, embodies our commitment to sustainable development.
Keep in mind that there are many possible correct answers. Rewind and try it again. Try stressing different words and using different intensifiers and emphasizing expressions. What happens when you put the words in a different order? Experiment. Now that you've finished that, you're probably thinking of more ways to practice. One good way to build fluency is to record yourself reading aloud. Work on the strategies we've learned today. First, before you read, mark pauses on the paper with a pencil. You can also use arrows to mark intonation, either up or down. And You can underline words you wish to stress. You should practice anticipating, that is, reading ahead. While you're making a pause, look at the next group of words. Focus on putting the words into grammatically logical groups. Don't be afraid to pause frequently and to make longer pauses. You can always practice speeding up later if you want. And that's about all for this episode on using your voice to give a good presentation. We've covered pausing, intonation, and stress. We've learned how to combine these elements to make your voice sound confident, fluent, and strong. Thank you for listening. Our next episode will focus on questions and answers.